I had all these people that I used to watch. Rocky was one, Barnes, Elias from Platoon, Jack from A Few Good Men. You know, he's on the stand going crazy. I saw a lot of these characters that I looked at and I was like, man, I ain't got none of that. But they were characters. After a while, I lived a life so disciplined that everybody that I once looked to, these fake characters, I built that as a man. And when I was younger, I had this image in my mind of what does a man look like to me? And I got all these people who were badasses, characters. And in my mind, I became that. And that's what kept me going a lot, was I had this pipe dream of becoming a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Because when you have no parents raising you and you have no role models growing up, it's not daydreaming. You start to create a reality like, maybe I can be that. And after becoming this guy, that is the biggest thing I can ever do in my life, is I became that guy. That I once looked at all these guys, now I look at myself like, God, who the can do that? I can't. But what it takes is a discipline that no one can ever even, they don't understand it. They don't understand, but everybody has the ability to do it, but they just don't want to. They want to keep asking questions and keep going to seminars. And the greatness is right in you. And that's why, once again, I'll say this a million times here, I do not feel sorry for you. I will not sugarcoat what I'm going to say to you, because all of you know what I'm saying is the truth. Everybody knows it's the truth. This is what it looks like. And you know it too. You know it too. This is what, if you ain't got nothing, I hate to tell you, what it looks like is ugly. It's not a documentary. It's not an HBO special. You ain't gonna watch them, hey man, you guys gotta watch this. No, it's like, oh God, this looks like a train wreck. It's like a nightmare. This looks like this guy got, no, that's what it looks like. Hard work looks horrible. It's not motivating. It's not motivating at all. It ain't like Rocky round 14, he gets knocked down and goes like this to Apollo Creed. It looks like a man being stuck in a fucking dungeon and there's no fucking way out. But you have the fucking key. But you refuse to use it. And that's nothing motivating about that. So yes, no documentary on David Goggins.
Early stages of hard work and focus are gonna feel like agitation, stress, and confusion, because that's the norepinephrine and adrenaline system kicking in. None of us would expect to walk into the gym and do our PR lift, or a performer go do something without warming up. The brain also needs to warm up and start to hone in which circuits are gonna be active. And it's unreasonable for us to think, oh, I've got an hour, I'm gonna plop down and write beautifully for an hour, my best work. We need to accept that there's a period of agitation and stress that accompanies the dropping into these highly concentrated states. Now, in terms of the reward that accompanies the feeling that we're funneling into that groove of being productive in one regime, like for you writing this book, the dopamine system is really important to understand. So we've talked about norepinephrine kind of gets you going. Acetylcholine is the spotlight of attention. The dopamine system is Mother Nature's hardwired ancient system in all animals, including humans, to put us on the right path. A lot of people talk about dopamine as this thing that you get when you publish the book, or when you get the book deal, or when something wonderful happens, like your child's born, and that's true. But dopamine's main role is to be released anytime you achieve a milestone or you think you're on the right path. And when the dopamine system is tethered to a particular pattern of focus, remember duration, path, and outcome. So it's like, okay, you sit down, maybe you don't get much text out, but then the next day you get 800 words of really solid text and you feel good. You're like, I'm into this. What does that dopamine system do? The dopamine system takes the norepinephrine, which is normally rate limiting, like at some point, there's so much norepinephrine that you quit. Dopamine can push that adrenaline back down, and give you more room, more space to do duration, path, and outcome work, highly focused work. And I'm making duration, path, outcome synonymous with highly focused work. Why would this happen? So let's think about an animal. Let's think about a deer that wakes up and is thirsty. and it's wandering out looking for water. That animal needs water. It doesn't know that it needs water. It experiences agitation, the same way that a baby feels agitation when it wants food, but it doesn't know it needs food. It just feels agitation and it cries, and the caretaker comes, hopefully. That deer is now foraging for something that it needs. And let's say it smells water, because deer can actually do that, and arrives at a stream and takes a sip of water. There's dopamine release then that puts it on a path to maybe a larger lake or something of that sort, or to be able to go achieve food. So when we are on the right path and we hit a milestone, dopamine is released, and it tends to tighten our focus more for that activity. This is why drugs of abuse and why alcoholism and some process addictions, which are behavioral addictions, are so dangerous, because a lot of those drugs of abuse are dopamine. So it becomes this cyclical loop where there's no other behavior that can evoke the same level of release.
Right.
In fact, I sort of define addiction as a progressive narrowing of the things that bring you pleasure. And I say that because it really is the way that the dopamine system works. Normally, the dopamine system is designed to be generic. It's designed to get me to do lots of things, social interactions, work, exercise, all those things. Just like the stress system is designed to get me out of bed in the morning, a cortisol pulse is what gets me out of bed in the morning. It's also what led me to pursue a career in science out of fear initially, and eventually pleasure. So the dopamine system is tethered to those states of focus. And it's what Mother Nature designed so that the neural plasticity would occur and you would want to continue those behaviors again in the future. That deer needs to know and remember and create a memory, not just of where that stream is, but the process of, when I feel that agitation, I'm gonna get up and go down this particular path.
Right.
And so people think of the dopamine system as this kind of like catch-all for reward. Oh, you get likes on Instagram and it makes you feel good. That's not really how it works. And the important thing to understand is when you start getting a convergence of norepinephrine, so that level of agitation, duration path outcome, acetylcholine, and dopamine, now you're starting to wire in the behaviors that make people really good at certain things. What this means is that for any of us, success in any endeavor is very closely related to how much focus we can bring to that endeavor. And the reward system, you start to realize, is entirely internal. No one's coming along and cramming dopamine in your ear or dripping it in your brain. It's all internal.
You don't know where you're going or why, the person who asked this question. So let's decompose the problem a little bit. I don't know what to do with my life. Well, that's a pretty vague problem, because your life that's a big, complex, multi-dimensional thing, and the probability that you're going to be able to formulate an answer to the question, what's the meaning of my life, is pretty much zero. Because, well, what do you want, a one-sentence answer? Like, it's a one-sentence question. You think there's a one-sentence answer? That's not helpful. And so what I often did practically in my clinical practice, and this is useful to know, especially if you're a bit lost, is, well, where do people generally derive their sense of meaning? And it's not that complicated to figure that out. Well, most people need or want an intimate relationship and some family interaction. Maybe that's children, maybe it's with your parents or your siblings, but zero family interaction is generally not part of the optimized human condition. Most of us would like to have a friend or two. We need a job or a career to keep body and soul together, but also so that we're in harness and we can pull against a weight that in a noble and productive and generous manner. We perhaps need to be engaged in something creatively. We have to take care of ourselves mentally and physically. We should adopt some civic responsibility. We need to protect ourselves against major sources of hedonistic and impulsive temptation. There's 8 things. It's like, well, pursue one of them. Start there. When I dealt with my clients who were depressed, unhappy, let's say, the first thing I would do with them is walk them through that analytic process. It's like, do you have anything in place in any of these domains Sometimes I had people who were doing pretty good in all 8 areas and were still unhappy. Those people were depressed, technically, right? Because their lives were actually in pretty good order, but they were miserable. There was something wrong with them. They were ill in some way that was lowering their mood, destroying their positive emotion. Other people would be batting 0 on all 8 fronts. Like, they weren't depressed, they just had terrible lives. And so, really, and so what I would do with those people is, well, look, like, here's 8 things that aren't in place in your life. It's no bloody wonder you're miserable and everything seems meaningless except for the suffering, because that's a meaning too. It's like, why don't we start working incrementally in a few of these areas, and then we can just evaluate and see if that's helpful. And it's almost invariably helpful, you know. And part of that is, well, specify. You ask yourself, well, what do I need that I don't have? Well, maybe I'd like to have a partner. Okay, well, I can't just leap from not having a partner to being happily married in one fell swoop. There's intervening steps. One of the things I used to do with my clients who were lonesome is say, well, look, have you tried online dating? No, I'm too afraid. It's like, well, no wonder you're afraid of it. You have your reasons. But we could start small. It's like, why don't you write out a dating profile? Don't post it. Just go online one of these sites and write out a profile. Who are you? What do you have to offer? And what do you want? Think it through, write it out. Come up with a coherent story about, a coherent representation about who you are. And then figure out what you want and see how that works. We can play that through, and then maybe when you develop that in a manner that feels solid to you and reliable and genuine, and you've also developed a vision of the person that you're trying to attract, that would help you feel confident in your happiness. If you actually met that person, well, then you're ready to go. Launch it on the site and talk to the person. You know, first maybe it's just text, and then maybe it's coffee, and you know, there's incremental ways of doing this, and you can do that with all of those 8 domains. It's like, get yourself a life. If you're firing on all cylinders in all 8 dimensions and you're still depressed, and this is a specific answer to the person formulating this question, if you're still unhappy, you should probably go see someone, because you're probably sick. You know, if you've got all of those, if you have all that skill and you have all those relationships and activities in place, and you still are suffering an excess of anxiety and pain and insufficient hope and motivation, it's highly probable that something's afflicting you that's in the nature of an illness. But if you have none of those things, it's like, well, it's no wonder you're miserable. Misery is the default human condition in the absence of sustaining meaning, just like hunger is the default condition in the absence of food. And you need productive engagement, productive, generous, reciprocal engagement, in order to provide you with the genuine meaning that sustains you in life. And the pathway, a lot of the pathway to that is pretty pragmatic and practical. You got no friends? That's likely a problem. You're a creative person, you have no creative outlet? That's not going to work out for you. No, you're lonesome because you don't have an intimate relationship? That's a source of pain. Those things have to be rectified, and you can do that incrementally, and that works. So that's a practical pathway to incremental improvement. And one of the things that's cool about that, because you might be thinking, oh my God, this is hopeless. I don't have any of those 8 things. I might as well just end it all tonight. It's like, and people certainly think that, you know, and I'm not making light of it. One of the things that's very much worth knowing is that a lot of positive emotion is dependent technically on the observation, on your personal observation that you're moving towards a valued goal. See, not that you've attained the goal. So imagine that you're in your hopeless situation and you decide, well, I'm going to work on the relationship front. So now you develop a vision of what a relationship might be like, and you posit that as a promised land, let's say. And then you differentiate that so you can make incremental steps forward, and the incremental steps are small enough so that you actually take them. As soon as you start to take them and you observe yourself moving forward in relationship to that goal, then first of all, you'll be stabilized on the anxiety front because now you have a purpose that's finite and defined. And second, you have positive emotion because you experience positive emotion in relationship to observing yourself move towards a valued goal. So right away, you don't have to attain the goal in order to be meaningfully engaged. You just have to be on the pathway forward.
And this starts to bring us into the kind of like discussion around mindsets. The discovery of growth mindset was of these kids that actually really enjoyed doing problem sets that they knew they couldn't get right. But for them, they would get this like dopamine release from just focusing on the problem. They liked doing puzzles they couldn't get right. It sounds crazy, but inevitably those kids are very good at puzzles and very good at math and these kinds of things. So growth mindset is, I believe, if it's sort of a neuroscience lens on growth mindset, would be that the agitation and stress that you feel at the beginning of something and when you're trying to lean into it and you can't focus is just a recognized gate. You have to pass through that gate to get to the focus component. And then if you can reward the effort process, you really start to feel joy and low levels of excitement in the effort process. That's that buffering of adrenaline. That's that feeling like, yes, I've got a lot of adrenaline in my system, but I'm on the right path. It feels good to walk up this hill, so to speak. And when you start to bring those neural circuits together, you really start to create a whole set of circuits that are designed to be exported to any behavior you want. So if it's writing a book, great. If it's podcasting, great. If it's building a business, great. If it's building a terrific relationship, great. Then the circuits that Mother Nature has designed are incredibly generic so that we could adapt to whatever it is that we need to do. And I think the misunderstanding around how these circuits work has led to this idea that there's some secret entry point, maybe marked flow on the door, and there's a trampoline up to that door, and you just open that door and you're gonna be in it.
Right.
And nothing could be further from the truth. And anyone who's done well in any career or athletic pursuit knows this, but unfortunately, there's a kind of obsession with the idea that it's all supposed to feel good. And it does feel good, but there's a whole staircase in which it feels kind of lousy. The idea that you can self-reward the effort process is extremely powerful, because what it means is that if you can recognize agitation, stress, and confusion as an entry point to where you eventually want to go, I do think that even just mental recognition can allow people to pass through it more easily. They think they're doing something wrong. And then rewarding yourself when you achieve any milestone, like running to a particular location if you're trying to run a long distance, and then registering that as a partial win. What we know is that the dopamine that's released in response to that suppresses the total amount of adrenaline and gives you more room, more time, more energy to run in the running example. And this is anchored in a real scientific result. So last year there was a paper published that essentially was asking why any human or animal quits at any behavior. We're talking about running, or we're talking about long bouts of work. The question is, why do we quit? Like, what is that? And it turns out that every time we exert effort, a certain amount of noradrenaline in the brain is released. And there's a sort of a counter in the brainstem. And at some point, enough noradrenaline is released and it shuts down cognitive control, deliberate control over the motor circuitry, and we quit. The thing that can restore those levels, or can sort of reset those levels lower and give us more gas, more mileage, is dopamine. And it makes perfect sense because our species had to move against very challenging things in nature and in terms of in culture at every stage of our evolution, including now. A good example would be if you're really slogging it out and things are miserable, just think like the worst family vacation, everything's a disaster, or a very hard physical event, and someone cracks a joke, you almost immediately feel a sense of relief. You see this in the team that wins the Super Bowl. Both teams slogged it out. You have to believe they were both at max effort the entire game. Look at the team that wins. They have extra energy. They're jumping all over the place. So it can't be physical energy. It can't be glycogen related. It's not ketone related. It's nothing in the body in that sense. It's dopamine's ability to take that level of norepinephrine and smack it back down. And so we can learn this, right? I mean, I think this is where there's real power, like in your story, or the story that I'm familiar with from your book, like the ability to push through those pain points is something that we really can export to other aspects of life, because it's the same neurochemicals that are involved. So when you get to a particular location, or maybe I recall, a portion where you're feeling lousy, you're injured or you feel like you're hurt, and you can reframe it mentally and think, I'm actually still on the ladder. I'm still holding on to a rung. I know at least that much. I'm still breathing. I know that much. And the lift that we get is not some psychological pump up. It's a neurochemical thing. It's dopamine suppressing norepinephrine and saying, you're on the right path. You can keep going. It's a permission to keep going. And we grant that permission to ourselves. No one grants that permission to us. I think one of the other kind of misconceptions that we want to dissolve is this idea that external rewards can actually propel us down long paths of success and high performance. They can't. But I have a friend from the SEAL teams, and somebody asked us recently, we were given a talk, and somebody said, how can I make sure that I continue to self-reward and I'm not driven by these external rewards? How can I continue to have that drive? And his answer was very good. He said, give away all the external rewards. There's a famous Stanford study done at Bing Nursery School. They did a study where they looked at kids that liked to playing during their recess. It's all recess in nursery school, but they're drawing, and they took the kids that really like to draw, and they started giving them little gold stars on their drawings. And then they like the gold stars for a kid, that's an extrinsic reward. And then they stopped doing that, and the kids stopped drawing. They associated the good feeling of doing it with the external rewards. Right. We have to be very cautious about how much of our internal dopamine we attach to external rewards if we want to continue to grow and pursue and focus and work hard. If you just want to get to some place and cash in, then fine. But most people find themselves in a pretty miserable place because their dopamine was so attached to external rewards, they need more and more. One of the most powerful things that any person can do is to learn to control this idea of duration, path, and outcome, and attach an internal sense of reward, just that you're doing well. To reward yourself mentally, just say, I'm doing well, I'm actually on the right path. To do that inside of the demands that come from the external world. The more often that we can self-reward some aspect of the process, provided it's in the right direction of what we're trying to achieve, the more energy we're going to have for that, the more focus we're going to have for that. And remember, the reason I say energy is that limiting amount of noradrenaline is constantly being kept at bay. You're literally buffering the quit response. And so when people start realizing that if they set the goals inside of the larger goal and self-reward each one of those, they essentially have an infinite amount of energy to pursue those goals. They have an infinite amount of focus to pursue those goals.
What do you think is the biggest stumbling block that most people face with this kind of journey?
Honestly, is they have the woe is me mentality. It's too hard. Life isn't fair. These things in life are not easy for me. You look to your left and you look to your right and you start to judge yourself off other people. Like if you're a female, well, she's skinny and she doesn't work out as hard as I do. And everything starts to corrupt your mind. You start to look around too much at other people and what they're doing, and that starts to corrupt your own dialogue. We are judging ourselves against too many fucking people. You have to judge yourself against yourself. And that's the one thing I started learning, man. This isn't a race against me and Rich Roll. This is a race against David Goggins and David Goggins alone. And once you can silence all that bullshit, all the outside interference and things that are attracting your mind to everything, you can then start to grow and realizing I'm stressed out for no reason. This is my own little race. This is my own timeline. It was important for me to finally realize, stop being all these fake people I used to be, stop being afraid. There was no growth until I cut myself down to nothing, to the person I really was, the real human being. And once I found out who I really was, that's when I started growing. I was trying to build on top of a lied, fucked up foundation. You can't build a house on a fucked up foundation. So I had to get down to the actual mineral soil of who I was, and that's when you can start real growth.
And what is the role that suffering plays in that, or the willingness to suffer?
It starts to peel all those layers away, all those artificial layers away. If you're willing to suffer and go back in the grind, that internal dialogue you have with yourself when you're in misery and you're uncomfortable, it's a real, scary, unfiltered, no lying dialogue between you and yourself. And people know exactly what the fuck I'm talking about when you're in a bad spot in life and your mind is saying all kind of shit. That's who you really are. That's the real you. No Rocky Balboa moments going on up there. You're like, hey, you know, it's round 14. Let's come on. We got this. No, it's like, fuck this. I'm out of here, man. This is crazy. That's where the growth happens. When you're able to stay in that moment and talk yourself back into the suck of wherever you're going through, and you start stripping those layers away. But as you're stripping those layers away, you're building calluses over top of shit in your mind. That's where the growth starts to happen, is when you have to force yourself to stay in it. You can't leave it. I don't think enough about people that have wronged me, or situations that have wronged me. Because once you've come to a place where you are really happy with who you are in life, no one fucks with you anymore. Even though they're fucking with you,
it doesn't fuck with you.
It doesn't fuck with you. You know, like all these, I used to be so hurt by everything in the military, and if someone did something or said something, like, man, I have overcome so much shit. There's not, I'm just in a really good headspace right now. My headspace, I own it. A lot of people own other people's headspace. I own my own shit now.
What do you mean own other? Like they're just all caught up in what other people think about them and running all these narratives in their mind.
That's right.
About...
They're more caught up in what other people think about them than how you feel about your own personal self. So a lot of people have their brain and their mind on rent to a whole bunch of motherfuckers in the world. I am paying rent on my own shit. I finally put a down payment on it, and I'm making payments every daggone day on my own fucking brain. So you don't fucking control that shit anymore, man. I got it.
So walk me through a day in the life. What's it look like right now?
Well,
I mean, it's got to be crazy.
Every morning I get up, I still get my run in every morning.
How do you structure the training?
The training is basically structured off of my schedule. So look at my schedule, and I say, okay, Jennifer, what do we have today? We have this at 7 o'clock in the morning. Roger that. That means I got to be up by 4 o'clock in the morning to run. That's how it works. That's how all my shit works. So she lays out the schedule of events.
2 hours. You just set it 2 hours earlier or whatever.
She says it could take an hour to get to Rich Rolls. Let's say we were at 7 o'clock today in the morning. It takes an hour to get to Rich Rolls with no traffic. Okay, let's block in an hour 15 for Rich Roll. Okay, we got that. The morning time, I'm gonna run 7 miles this morning. I need 52:30 for that. Roger that. Put in shit, shower, shave. Add that in. So the schedule dictates, but I have all that time.
Just push it back, right? So if that means getting up at 1:30.
Trust me.
Roger that.
I've done that several times.
Yeah.
Several.
How much sleep
times.
do you usually get?
I like getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Nowadays I can do that. But there's times where the schedule says, hey man, you're getting 3 hours. And if that's the case,
right.
Merry Christmas. But guess what? Right now, it's easy to be happy. It's easy to smile. Those are the good times. The good times. Those times don't need to be trained. You know, I had to train myself for good times. Those times, for most people, don't need to be trained. What I'm trying to give you all is the misery of sometimes we go through in life. Those are the times we don't want to fucking talk about. We want to skip forward to peace. Let's skip all this pain and suffering and misery of real life. Let's cover it over, nice big blanket, and let's find peace. No. Sorry. It's not possible. got to go into that fucking hellhole of life that you have that fucked you up and fix it. And that's what I'm here to do.
You got to go to war with yourself before there's peace.
That's what I say in the
That's
book.
what you say in the book.
You must go to war with yourself before you find peace. So I'm trying to give you tools on how to do that. And I'm not going to sit here and smile and be happy about it. It's a hard journey. It's a real journey. It was so crazy. That's why I look at motivation. Motivation is just a spark, but those little sparks, if somebody comes by real quick with some water, that fire's down, it's out. But if you come by and that little fire, no one touches it, and that little fire, which is motivation, which is kindling, and that kindling grows off to, like they call it, 1 hour fuels, 2 hour fuels, 10 hour fuels, 10,000 hour fuels. You want that thing to boil over and catch a nice big log. It's gonna burn a long time. And that big log starts catching everything on fire. This is your soul. So motivation a lot of times can be fucking just put some water on it, puts it out. That motivation needs to turn into drive, passion, obsession to what you want to become. And once you become obsession or driven, it's a fucking inferno. So now you got to call in tons of firefighters and call in for help for here, calling for help from there. And they're not putting that shit out. Only thing that can take that thing out, it's got to burn itself out.
But obsession is self-generated. You can't
100%.
will another
No.
person to become obsessed.
Not at all.
That has to, be something that is cultivated from deep inside yourself.
Deep
And most
inside
people never experience what it's like to be obsessed. And I think we put a negative label. Label on obsession. Oh,
Hell yeah.
He's obsessed.
No, to me, it's a daggone, it's a compliment. It's a compliment, man, to be, and a lot of times it can fuck you up. It can ruin your life. You can be obsessed, but I'll tell you one thing. If you want to be great, you want to be the baddest motherfucker ever at what you do, you could be misunderstood by everybody because you're going to be so fucking obsessed and so driven to get there. And that's what it takes.
That's the truth.
It takes every second of your fucking life. Anybody says balance? Yeah, balance is important for a lot of fucking people. It is. But if you want to fucking go to that edge where people do not like you, don't understand you, question everything you fucking do, you've arrived. When you are misunderstood to the point where fucking people think you're psycho and you're nuts and you're this and that, why are you in the fucking gym at 1 o'clock in the fucking morning? You just got to doing an op for fucking 13, 14 hours after Ranger School, man, at the gym. What's wrong? You will never understand what is wrong with me. And that's why I'm so fucking glad you don't. Because I'm in the right fucking spot. When people don't understand you anymore, you're in that spot of obsession and drive. Where people are like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? I don't want to talk to you, man, because you're not going to get it. It's all about mindset.
Yeah.
That's it, man. You have to change the dialogue within your head. And one thing I guarantee you, there's some stat out there about January 1. All that kindling that you started, all that motivation usually burn out by about 10 to 12 days later. So let's see how far you can take that shit. Let's see if you can get a fucking
That is a
inferno
challenge
going.
from Goggins to you.
Usually it's 10 to 12 days, man. People always come to me, man, hey, I want a workout program. I no longer give them anymore because you're going to waste my fucking time. Because I know most people out there, once that fucking 1 alarm clock goes off at the wrong time of the day, I'm not going to the gym.
Right. Or they get the workout program, but then they're like, hey, they hit you up again. What kind of watch do I need to get?
That's right.
What
That's
kind
right.
of shoes?
That's
the questions
right.
just keep coming.
Keep coming,
Every
man.
day goes by without anything going on.
Keep coming. Go to the store, buy a pair of shoes, and Merry Christmas. Have fun with that shit. Call me after you lose some fucking weight running your ass in the dirt, and then we'll work on some other shit.
Right on.
Get your base on.
Many times in life, people don't get what they want and they need because they don't aim at it. And it's a hard lesson for people to learn because they're cynical to begin with and they presume that there's no possible way of moving forward. But it's not so unreasonable to assume that you're not going to hit what you don't aim at, or you're not going to hit what you aim at and don't shoot at. And I've seen time and time again that if people do put forward a vision for what they regard as worthy of pursuit, which is something you have to determine in dialogue with yourself, It's like, given the difficult preconditions of existence, is there anything that you could conceive of that you would regard as sufficiently worthwhile so that you would be motivated to pursue it? It's a profound philosophical question, and it's not an unreasonable one. It's a good place to start. It's like, well, life is difficult enough to make you cynical and bitter, and perhaps enough to make you cynical and bitter and suicidal and homicidal and even genocidal. And it's not surprising in some sense. And then the question is, well, is there something that you can pursue that allows that to be acceptable or perhaps even desirable, which is something to do that justifies the suffering? And it's hard to say what that would be for each of you. It's something that you can discover. This is partly why Nietzsche was wrong. Nietzsche thought that after God had died, that human beings would have to invent their own values. But the psychoanalysts, I would say Jung foremost among them, put forward a very powerful counterclaim, which was that, well, you can't invent values. They're already built into you. You have to discover them. And I think that's true for each person. It's like, well, what would justify you in the abandonment of your resentment and hostility? What would be a sufficiently adventurous goal? And this is part of the problem with the collectivist viewpoint, I believe. I was thinking about that today too. You know, I learned as a psychotherapist not to solve my clients' problems for them. You're a bad therapist if you offer advice. I mean, you do sometimes, because there are situations that are relatively trivial that just need to be strategized through. But fundamentally, what you want to do, if you're careful, as a friend or a family member or as a psychotherapist, is to help the person discover their own pathway forward, right? And that's going to be a difficult pathway, because it means that they're going to have to accept the burden of their life. And then they're going to have to come up with their own solutions to what would justify that burden. And if they come up with their own solutions, then often they find one that at least in part justifies the burden. And the problem with the collectivist perspective, especially the one that portrays you as a victim, is that it's always up to someone else to solve your problems. It's not like you don't have the problems. You know, the idea that in some sense you're an eternal victim, well, there's a truth in that, given that nature is conspiring to destroy you and will be successful in the end, that you're undermined by your own society at the same time you're buttressed by it, and that you're a target of your own malevolence and that of others. I mean, so there's a triad of tragic and malevolent forces that are aimed directly at your heart, and that's always the case. But to not take responsibility for that and to attribute to that to a cosmic injustice or a sociological injustice in some sense that's aimed particularly at you, that's somehow the fault of others, is to miss the great adventure of your life. One of the things I learned last year, I was doing a series of biblical lectures, and I started to analyze the Abrahamic stories, which I didn't know very well. And the story of Abraham is particularly interesting because Abraham he's a slow starter. He's one of those guys that failed to launch, right? He's in his father's tent, hanging around his mother's skirts till he's 80. And 80, that's exactly it. And God finally gets fed up with him and says, look, why don't you get the hell out of the tent and get out there in the world and have an adventure? You know, your life is waiting for you. And well, it's God calling, so Abraham has enough sense to pack up and leave, but it's complete bloody catastrophe from there on in, you know. I mean, the first thing he encounters is a famine, and that's no joke, and then it's a tyranny, that's the next thing, and then it's a conspiracy to steal his wife. And I'm sure that he spent the next 20 years wondering why in the world he ever listened to God and just didn't stay in his damn tent. You know, but there's the Abrahamic story and the stories that follow that they all have that same narrative structure, is that there's this call to adventure, but it's not to happiness by any stretch of the imagination. It's to a heroic mode of being that involves taking responsibility for the full catastrophe, and that in that adoption of that adventurous mode of being, there's a deep meaning to be found. Right, a meaning maybe that transcends just you, that involves your family and that involves your community and maybe even the destiny of humanity itself. but there's nothing about that that's secure or easy, and very little that has to do with happiness. The idea that your problems should be solved for you, let's say, and that it's unfair that you have them, well, it's attractive in that there's nothing for you to do except complain, but it's horrifying in that there's nothing for you to do except complain. The difficulty is actually, the funny thing is the difficulty is actually the destiny. And it is insanely difficult, but maybe you're insanely up to the task. You know, and I would also say, there is evidence for this, you know, in the clinical literature. We know that one of the main strategies that you can use to help people cure themselves is for them to grapple with what they're terrified by, grapple with what they're terrified so badly that they're avoiding, and to learn to confront it in pieces, in stages, in manageable stages. Not too much, you know, because you can hurt yourself, but not too little, because then it's pointless. And it works. It makes people not less vulnerable, but more courageous and stronger, which is better than being less vulnerable, because good luck with that. That's not happening. But you can be more courageous and you can be stronger. And if you take on the burden of confronting the catastrophe of your existence, then that happens. And it actually works. And that's part of what everyone is called upon to discover in their life, and partly what religious stories try to remind people of, in some sense, to wake them up, say, you're more than you think you are. And this is another thing I realized on this tour, actually. I hadn't conceptualized this properly before. There's this old idea that the hero rescues his father from the abyss, or from the belly of a great monster, the dead father. You see that reflected in stories like Pinocchio in the Disney movie, because the puppet rescues Geppetto from the belly of a whale, the most terrifying possible place, at the bottom of the lowest possible abyss. And what that means is this, is that if you stare, and this is the answer to the Nietzschean dilemma. Nietzsche said, beware of staring. If you look long into an abyss, then the abyss looks into you. Well, if you look long enough into an abyss, then you discover something at the bottom of it. And what you discover at the bottom of it is your dead father. And what that means is that if you look at what terrifies you forthrightly enough, then you discover the spirit of your ancestors that you could become. And that won't be called out of you without that courageous confrontation. Because nothing is called out of you without it being demanded. It's the same as working out in a gym. You lift heavy weights, not so heavy that they hurt you, but heavy enough so that they're slightly beyond your capacity to grasp. Nothing is compelled out of you without necessity. And so then you ask, well, what if you subject yourself to the highest possible level of necessity? Maybe then the possibility is that the best there is called forth out of you. And that's a union with all the great, that's the union with what's greatest about humanity in the past, because that's in you. But it's not going to come out without compulsion, and the compulsion that you set upon yourself. And so that's the antidote to the collectivist viewpoint. It's like, it's your problem, and thank God for that. Because you need a problem to justify your miserable existence. And it has to be a problem of sufficient magnitude so that you can look yourself in the mirror when you wake up in the morning and you can think, well, despite my inadequacy and all the things about me that are insufficient, at least I'm bearing up under this worthwhile load. And that's a start. So, thank you.
Do as you wish, but know what you're doing. That's my stance. I am not anti-alcohol. I'm not an alcoholic. I don't particularly like alcohol, so I can drink or not drink. I don't tend to drink. I might have a sip of alcohol. Well, it's been a long time since I've had a sip of alcohol, but
There are certain white tequilas I've enjoyed, and like occasionally like, one of those, and, or a vodka and soda or something. So just to be clear, like I'm not anti-alcohol. My read of the data are, as you pointed out, that yes, alcohol is a poison, but many things are a poison, and the dose determines the poison. It seems that our threshold for what we call moderate or low amounts of drinking is shifting nowadays. I don't know if that had something to do with the alcohol episode that we did, but here's what I do know. The data say that 0 to 2 drinks per week, you're probably fine, provided you're not an alcoholic and you're of age, okay? And you're not pregnant or dealing with some other, something that would make it a case where you wouldn't want to drink at all. 0 to 2 drinks per week. Now, what happens past 2 drinks per week depends on a lot of other contextual factors, okay? First of all, how well or poorly you metabolize alcohol, how much alcohol dehydrogenase you tend to express. Why do I say that? Well, a lot of the so-called negative effects of alcohol are due to disruptions in sleep and gut microbiome. So those are indirect, right? Alcohol is changing for the worse the gut microbiome and sleep patterns. We know this. People that track their sleep, they have 1 drink and they're like, holy cow, my sleep is so much worse. Not just sleep score, but amount of REM sleep, amount of deep sleep, etc. Is that the direct or indirect cause of any kind of disruption in brain structure or in neuronal health? We don't know. But what these larger scale studies show is that if you look at the amount of gray matter thinning, which occurs with age regardless, gray matter being the neurons in the brain, white matter being the fiber tracts, the axons and myelin in the brain, is how they're imaged, so they show up as gray or white. The amount of gray matter thinning starts to increase as you get out past 2 drinks per week. Now, is it significant enough that people should be concerned about cognitive decline as a consequence of 3 drinks per week induced gray matter thinning? Probably not. So then should we set the threshold at 3 drinks per week or 4 drinks per week? I don't know, and I'm not here to say that one way or the other. What I'm saying is my read of the data, and I know there are people that disagree with me, is that 0 is better than any. And that, I think, I'm told, has brought great relief to a number of people that didn't want to drink, but that actually were drinking red wine specifically to try and get some quote unquote health benefits. It also brought great relief to a number of people because they tell me that did not like drinking. They didn't like the way drinking made them feel, either while they were under the influence of it, or maybe taste, or just general malaise the next day, or due to disruption in sleep. I don't really know the reasons. But for people who don't like drinking or who don't want to drink, I think there's ample evidence that 0 is great, that you don't need to drink, okay? It might seem like a kind of silly statement, but I think a good number of people kind of doing it because they thought there were health benefits. Now, to be fair, most people were drinking, and if they were talking about the health benefits, because they like the way alcohol makes them feel. And to me, it's clear that if you care very much about your brain, that more than 2 drinks per week on a consistent basis, probably not a good idea. Now, are there exceptions to that? Sure. Are there people who, everyone says, well, I had a grandparent and they lived to be 98 and they're super sharp and they drank, a shot of vodka every night. Great. Great. I just say, well, how much better would they have been had they not? But I also understand you need to live life. And for many people, alcohol is one route by which they enjoy life more because of its relaxing effects. And that's important to note, that anxiety is bad. Anxiety that disrupts sleep is bad. So many people will drink to provide a segue from the work day to the evening, and they find it helps them calm down and sleep better. But we know it disrupts your sleep. Would it be better to not drink at all? Probably, but I want to be respectful of that scenario as well. If we look at 4 drinks per week, 5 drinks per week, let's say a drink a night, 7 drinks per week, I just don't see where the debate is. To me, you look at the gray matter thinning, you look at some of the other metrics on gut microbiome, you look at the disruption in sleep, and again, people should do as they wish, but know what they're doing. And it's just so clear that it's not good for people and that they're doing at least some degree of harm. Now, there's also the business of offsetting harm. I always say, listen, if you're the kind of person who wants to have a drink every night, be my guest if that serves you well. But you might be wise to also do some things that offset some of the, for instance, gut microbiome disruption. Perhaps pay a bit more attention to consuming 1 to 4 servings of low sugar fermented foods per day to really feed the gut microbiome. Maybe be extra thoughtful about a consistent sleep schedule. Maybe be extra thoughtful about a number of other things to offset whatever negative effects are sure to be introduced by that kind of regimen. So 0's best, 2's probably fine, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is where are you going to shorten your life by a significant amount? Well, provided you don't drive while you're drunk, probably not. Are you going to be disrupting your health? Probably. Mainly indirect effects through disrupted sleep or gut microbiome, trying to offset those effects. But then once you get past, a drink per night, which many people are consuming, then I think there's general agreement. Higher incidence of cancers, especially in women, higher incidence of cancers generally, and a number of other things related to immune system disruption. So, and on and on. And, just as a final statement, I don't have anything against alcohol. The alcohol is, I understand it's part of the fabric of most every culture, and that says something. But to my mind, alcohol, if you don't like it or you care about your health more than you care about alcohol, I say, don't drink. It's pure and simple. Two things. One is an observation. One is perhaps a suggestion to everyone. The observation is that disengaging from social media takes time, but it happens very readily every single time. So for instance, get off work, you're still on your phone, you're with family, still on your phone. They're like, hey, want to engage. You put it away, expect some agitation. Expect like something's been taken away from you. It's this kind of low-level malaise. Other things aren't as interesting. I mean, hopefully one's life is interesting and hopefully isn't just drawing us out of like urgent demand. But it requires a little bit of time. If you've ever gone camping or you don't have access to your phone, in fact, this coming weekend, I'm going to take 3 days away from my phone. And I'm sure getting back to the phone will feel a little bit oppressive. It'll feel like a little bit oppressive. But once the phone is away, expect 20 minutes to an hour during which you don't feel quite right, maybe even some underlying anxiety, because it's that unconscious anticipation. So that's the observation. The suggestion I have for people to have a healthy relationship with social media is one actually that I learned from a professional poker player, which is play for time. Don't, if you're winning, don't stay there, right? You're losing, don't, I guess I don't want to suggest people gamble, but this is all just translating to social media. Play for time. Designate how much time you're going to spend on there in a given bout. So for me, getting a post up once every day or so, maybe 4 times a week is kind of the goal. And I try and mix up the form of post, and I have rules for myself. Most specifically, I try and make sure that 90% of posts are so the audience can learn something useful, hopefully also interesting and actionable, etc. 10% are kind of from my delight. I can't help it. Or where I'm curious about, I'm kind of pinging the audience for their thoughts because I genuinely want to know. Like I was walking up the Upper East Side with my girlfriend a few weeks ago and saw this sign outside a store. It said, we have Ozempic and Mounjaro, and I took a picture of it and thought, that's kind of weird. It's normally you see like we have lattes or something, and I just kept walking. And then when I got back to California, I posted that on social media. I thought, kind of curious, what do people think of Ozempic and Mounjaro? I know it's controversial. I'll just ask people. And it was tons of engagement. I didn't even expect it, but I'm learning a lot from all those comments. So I have rules, but the main rule is I don't let myself, or I try to not let myself pick up the phone and just at any old time and go into social media. I really try. I don't always succeed, but I really try. And if I'm going to be on there, I'm like, okay, I'm on here now for an hour, or I give myself an hour. That's the best thing I can do. I also know that if I answer a few comments, I'm kind of a runaway train when it comes to people pinging me with questions about science. It's very hard for me not to reply. So I have to limit myself to, 5 to 15 responses. And I'm like, and then I actually feel some anxiety as I go to do my life activities. I have to tell myself they'll be okay. It's just kind of like you ask a professor, at least this professor, a question about something. If I know the answer, like I'm going to try and tell you. So there's always that agitation, but for me, so expect that agitation when you set it away, and play for time. Don't base it on any particular mode of engagement or whether or not it feels good or doesn't feel good. Play for time. So decide I'm gonna be on here for 30 minutes. And it's interesting because when I don't do that, what I start to notice is I'm scrolling, but I don't even know what I'm doing. Like, what am I doing here? X and Twitter, totally different picture. Because I now go on X and Twitter and I know they're gonna try and get me through a, let's just call it a psychosocial dynamic. Someone, like, you're on there to see how people are gonna engage. It is a little bit more combative. It also can be really supportive because of the immediate retweet function. You see something you like, it can get out to a lot of people. You can link out to things. But it's more of a, like the center of the town square where everybody's interacting. And so I have very clear cognitive pictures of, like, Instagram feels pretty benevolent to me. You know, people have to generally show their face, right? X feels like, okay, do I really want to engage in this very intense dynamic? So I go on X far less, and I've had much more polarized responses to things that I've put up there. I've had things clipped out of context. I've had attacks, and I just don't enjoy being angry. I don't enjoy feeling that friction. It just sucks for me, and I don't like seeing other people suffer. So on X, I see just a lot more of that, and I've got nothing against it, and I think they've done great things with the platform, but I have to just be really protective of myself to not go there terribly much.
Is there like studies that have shown there's a maximum amount of time that, like, adults, maybe children versus adults, should spend like with their smart devices to, you know, for prevent these huge amplitude and peaks in dopamine where they're just getting, you know, really rewarding things, or even just, like you're saying, negative things that can be in a way it's very, you know, you're getting that like engagement, and that you know, it's
the clap back. You know, if you get a good clap back on somebody, I mean, there's a neuroscientist up at University of Washington, Sam Golden, who's shown that, you know, animals will work for the opportunity to fight. They'll work for it. We never understood this until recently. I mean, you could say we always understood that, but no, like, you know, humans probably too. That, you know, engaging in those kind of high intensity ways can be rewarding for some folks, even for people who don't like that, unless they're really conflict averse. It has a certain level of arousal itself can become rewarding, right? Just the engagement, when I say arousal, like the level of cognitive engagement, especially if the rest of life feels kind of passive and uninteresting. There have not been clear studies that I'm aware of, but at the same time, if I think of something like virtual reality, like my colleague at Stanford, Jeremy Bailenson, has done, he's one of the early pioneers of virtual reality. And as virtual reality came to be, they established, and I'll get the numbers wrong here, so forgive me, Jeremy, I have to look this up, but, you know, limits of, you know, kids should only be in the VR goggles for X number of minutes per day, and it was minutes. Otherwise, there's rewiring of the visual system and vestibular system, the balance system, in ways that might not be healthy. They had real clear limits and guidelines. With social media, it was sort of like as much as you want. And then, of course, there's the intrusion of social media and tablet use and phone use into sleep, where then you're depleting the where you're undermining the replenishment of the dopamine reserve, right? So then there's all that contextual stuff. I think an hour a day on Instagram, if you think about it, that's a pretty significant investment. And with X, I can't even make a recommendation. I do go on there and post. I have a kind of a bittersweet relation to it right now. Lex Friedman, our buddy, has a far more kind of symbiotic relationship with X. It just sort of like works for him, whereas I feel that more on an Instagram platform. And it's different cultures, and maybe I need to adjust my follows and so on. But I think an hour a day to me just seems like, okay, that's plenty and is enough. Because I grew up and spend still a fair amount of time in the Bay Area, although I'm in Los Angeles far more now. An interesting question is always to ask the heads of these companies or the CEOs how long they let their kids be on social media, and you'll often find that it's a very, very small number. And that tells you something right there. Okay, so I think the task switching, the context switching, no doubt is impairing adults' ability to engage and stay engaged in one thing. Reading a book, unless it's extremely engaging, is going to be less attention harnessing than social media. Why? Because social media is movies. Why? You're scrolling. I mean, the brain has never seen this kind of thing before. Even if you have 300 channels on your television, and you're just scrolling at short distance with the feedback of people you recognize, and which isn't true for most people with watching television, or and feedback and likes and comments and clapbacks and attacks and reward. I mean, it's incredible. I think I'm a content consumer, but I'm a content creator, as you are, of course. And I like to think in terms of, are we consuming content or are we creating content? And just being very judicious about consumption of content. I mean, I think it's great fun, and I encourage people to put stuff out on social media. In fact, recently a clip was cut. There was like a math gaffe that I did, and I came out and apologized for the error. I occasionally make errors in podcasts, and we put them in the captions. But anyway, put something out there. But the caption to that post was, I would hate for anyone to resist posting their creative thoughts, their creative outlet, for fear of attack or making mistakes. I think we need to, I sound kind of like, it's a party line now, but to foster a community of people, like encouraging people to create stuff and put it online. But that's different than just passive consumption all the time. I think there's so much good to be had with social media, but I think an hour a day on Instagram, maybe 30 minutes a day on X, and you're good. And even there, 90 minutes out of your waking day. And then what part of your day? This is important. When I look at my day, I know that when I wake up in the morning, I'm a little groggy, but then I've got 3 or 4 hours that if I'm going to get really quality work done, it's in that 3 or 4 hours or the 3 or 4 hours right after lunch. And that's it. I'm not the kind of person that's doing quality work now between the hours of 8 p.m. and midnight. It's just not happening anymore. It happened years ago, but it's not happening anymore. So where is that 60 to 90 minutes falling is also key. Maybe it should be for an hour or so before bedtime, provided it's not too stimulating. Maybe it should be over your lunch break and you just handle it then. But when it's first thing in the morning, then several times throughout the morning, and then later in the afternoon, and then in the evening, I think what I'm describing is not unusual. And not unusual, not just for kids. Jonathan Haidt's work that's being discussed so much now about social media consumption and the challenges and concerns with that, but also in adults. I mean, since when? I'm 48 years old, and it's kind of remarkable. I mean, I see people from my high school class, and I'm one of them, so I can only laugh at myself here, but it's like we're grown adults, posting what we did and showing it off to the world. There's a kind of teenage element to it. It's kind of silly if I really step back from it. I go, wait, are the adults behaving like kids and the kids are behaving like adults? What's going on here? But it's sort of, if we step back and look at ourselves like an experiment, we'd say, wow, the people in the 35 to 60-year-old range of this species that we call human is kind of doing the same stuff that the kids are doing. And maybe you just say, well, duh, but it's interesting. I mean, and you say, well, how good or poor of one's life is that? And so I think about this stuff a lot, but I'm on there and I teach and I enjoy it and I learn and, and I'll continue. But I think one has to be really discerning and set constraints.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if it's tapping into your dopamine system and if it's kind of like that substance, right? It's technology. It's not methamphetamine. It's not cocaine, but it sure as heck is affecting your dopamine system. And so
it absolutely is. And it also has the potential for a lot of problems. This isn't a domain that, I have expertise in or that is covered on the podcast, but, there's this guy on who's done some podcasts with Lex Friedman, and he's been on a few others, James Sexton. He's a divorce lawyer in New York. And he talks about how the advent of social media has created this huge surge in I don't know if overall divorce rates, but then, he talks about the trajectory of a lot of the failures of a lot of marriages. And it's that, and actually people have talked about Instagram as one of the main dating apps. It's not sold as it's not offered as a dating app, but this is where a lot of people meet. They see people they used to know, hey, how's it going? And then the conversation converts. I mean, this is, I'm neither saying, I'm not passing judgment. I'm just saying, there's a lot in the landscape of social media that lends itself to too much ease in certain types of human interaction. And that inhibits our ability to do things that are really functional for our relationships and for our professional lives and for family. I mean, you know, or just presence, you know, just like being there. Not to get sentimental here, but that graduate advisor I was talking about before unfortunately passed away young. She had the BRCA mutation, died at 50. Her name was Barbara Chapman, had 2 lovely daughters. Actually, the second one just finished university in neurosciences, so I was super happy for her. And I'll never forget at her, it wasn't her funeral, but it was a kind of like celebration of life thing after she ended, that her daughters, maybe it was one or both, talked about how one of the best things about their mom and their memories of their mom was unstructured time with her, where she would just like sit with them and hang out, and they would just like do stuff. And she wasn't a heavy user of the phone. So that was 2014, she passed away. So phones were kind of really beginning to pick up in terms of their use, smartphones. But I that rung in my mind because I was thinking, wow, like of all the things for children to remember about their deceased mom, it was the unstructured time. It wasn't the Giants game, although they probably remember that, they were big Giants fans or other things, but it's the unstructured time that we spend with people where they are giving us their full presence and we're giving them our full presence. And then you look around at like dinner tables now in restaurants, you look around and like everyone's on their phones. Anyway, I'm saying what everyone already knows and I'm guilty of it too, but I think the world is due for an adjustment.
You have to look at suffering as almost like I look at failure. To succeed, you must fail. In failure and in suffering, all the answers are in there. All the answers to all the test questions. The test is your life. All the answers are in there. You don't have to live in suffering and pain and failure all the time. You have to learn, I need to visit it. Like people hate working out. You're only going to visit working out maybe an hour a day. 23 other hours of the day, you're not in it. But how you become in shape is you must visit suffering, visit working out 1 hour a day. Visit suffering 1 hour a day. Visit your past failures 1 hour a day. The relationship with it is the answers are in there. They are in there. Within the suffering, go in there, and I call it the live autopsy. The live autopsy. How you find out someone died? They crack you open after you're dead. How you can live is do it while you're alive. Go back in your brain, crack it open while you're alive. Don't wait until you're fucking dead to figure out why you died. Do it while you are living. Go in there, go into the suffering, go into the pain of your life and say, why did this suck for me so bad? Why am I afraid of all this stuff? Why have I shut down the whole world? I guarantee I'll tell you why you shut down the whole world. It's in these nooks of the suffering within your brain, in the scarring, are all the answers to why you are on the couch feeling sorry for yourself. They lie within the scars. Visit them for at least an hour a day. Study them. And then you'll find out more about yourself. You will then grow. So don't look at it as every day I suffer. Go into it an hour a day. Learn from yourself. Learn from life. Learn from your failures. Learn from your insecurities. Learn from your self-doubt. Don't just say, I'm afraid to jump off an airplane. What makes you afraid of it? Study it. That's why I studied my mind. Why I became so powerful in the mind is because I realized I was weak. So instead of running away from the mind, I dove into it and said, what is making me weak? Oh, this makes sense. I came from hell. I came from a place that beat me down to nothing, which is why I'm afraid. All this makes sense. So systematically, one by one, I went back and met every single person in my mind, every situation. I went one-on-one with them again in my mind and said, okay, let's now revisit this. And that's how you do it. That's how it works. Your mind chooses the path of least resistance. Your mind has the ultimate tactical advantage over you. It knows what scars you. It knows your fears. It knows your insecurities. And it protects you, which is why I talked about the 40% rule in my book. The 40% rule is all about the brain has the tactical advantage over you. It knows and it keeps you away from all that. That's why it says don't jump out of an airplane. Don't go in the ocean where there's sharks. It's a protective mechanism. Don't go back to the place where your dad beat the shit out of you in your mind. Don't go back. The brain protects you, but protects you so much, it doesn't allow growth. So the brain is an amazing thing, but the brain controls you. You must control it. You must take power over your own mind, or your mind will guide you into all the soft places that your brain wants to live in. Your brain has enough information. It doesn't want to go through that process of mind hardening. It doesn't want to do that. I got to remember what time I got to be here, what time I got to be there. This is where I want to stay. I'm peaceful. It wants to stay very peaceful and away from scarring. You have to be able to break all these big, humongous, painful things in life down to the smallest molecule, because that's all the brain can handle. The brain can't handle hours and hours and hours of suffering, but it can handle right now. I'm in the Pacific Ocean and it's very cold, and this is what I'm doing. Don't think about the rest of it. So that's what I learned from Hell Week. That's what I learned from being in 3 Hell Weeks. That's what I learned from all the military. I went to Ranger School. I went to all these different schools to learn all of that, to learn how the mind processes. So I talk about theorists. I talk about practitioners. A theorist is a person who reads a book, doesn't do it, reads a book, learns about something, and then talks about it. A practitioner is myself. A practitioner is a person like me. I wanted to be an expert in the mind, a mental toughness guy, beyond mental toughness. The only way to do that, in my eyes, is to put yourself in hell. Put it in hell repeatedly. Repeatedly put yourself in hell and study how you process it. And that's how I was able to come up with all these different ways, all these different tools to slow the mind down in hell. Because the mind just speeds up. The mind wants to get out of the painful situation, the suffering. It can't process it. So that's what I realized by going through all these different processes of being in Hell Weeks. There's some times where the mind gets overwhelmed and you cannot slow it down. But by these certain tools I developed, by not allowing your mind to get away from the moment. You have to think about the exact moment that you're in. But I saw when I was younger, the moment became too big. When it became too big, I spazzed out and I would quit. But now I don't think about even like an hour from now, I'll be eating. I don't even go there. Because then your mind, no, we must embrace this, because now you have to be a leader in this moment. It's not about you just getting through it. I had 5 guys, and 6 including me, in my boat crew. Now I was the boat crew leader. So now another trick is this. If you don't think about yourself, there's no pain. Which can also lead to pain later on in your life. But in these moments when you're struggling, if you are a true leader and you're worried about your men or women beside you, your mind doesn't care how cold you are anymore. Your mind's only worried about taking care of the men and women beside you. So I started realizing, man, if I take care of these cats to my left and my right in the worst moments, my mind is no longer thinking about, you're miserable, David Goggins. Get the hell out of here. You're thinking about, how was John? How was Andy? How was Sam? How was Pete? How are you guys doing? You're not thinking about me. So there's so many things you can do to get outside your own head to then allow your body to just be like, hey, we're just a machine. But you have to let your mind be able to process all these different tactics to do that. Take a different vantage point in life. When you are in the hell, you can't see the beauty of being in it when you're in it. Get on top of that mountaintop in your mind. Get on top of that mountaintop and look down on what you're doing. You can see a whole different world, and that world is beautiful. But you gotta get a different vantage point in the suck. Don't be in it. Spiritually, get out of it. Get that soul. Look down on what you're doing. Be amazed by the process of where you're at now and where you came from. We all have a voice in our head. Some of us are very spiritual, some of us are not, but we all have this voice saying, you're doing fucked up shit. This is wrong. Don't do that. The more you don't listen to that voice, the further that voice gets away from your head. Some people call it the Holy Spirit, some people call it God, some monks, whatever you call it. It's there. We all have it. It's the right or wrong voice. But the more we don't listen to it, the more that voice goes away. The only voice you hear is yourself. When the only voice you hear is yourself, you're wrong. There's a voice that guides you through life. When sometimes it's guiding you in a direction that you don't want to go, that's usually the right place to go. It's that uncomfortable place. So that voice is always talking to me, but we don't listen to it. I listen to it. And when I start getting anxious, nervous, like we all know when we've done too much because it's telling us, I'm getting tired, I'm wearing down. But we go. I start talking to my fiance, hey, I'm doing too much. You start now, like I did in Hell Week, like I do all the time, the 1 second decision. It's that decision when your mind starts to get so amped up. Whenever you can't hear yourself think, you gotta slow down. Whenever you're living off a schedule, every day's a schedule, you have no time for yourself. When you start, and we all know it, I don't have time for this anymore, I don't have time for that anymore. That's when your mind and your body are saying, think about that. I'm neglecting my fiance, I'm neglecting my disciplines of life, I'm neglecting my reading, my learning, my workouts, my diet. When you start neglecting all of that, you neglect one of them, you can neglect all of them a long time. It's going to haunt you. When you start seeing that, my God, I haven't eaten right in a long time, haven't been sleeping right in a long time, it can only be one of those things to take you off. So I'm very aware of my eating, my sleeping, my disciplines of life. And when I start to get too far away from them, it's a hard stop. Because what made me are the not just disciplines, the self-disciplines of life. And those are always in front of you. If you have any, they're always in front of you. So that's my hard stop. I realized that my mentality had to be very different. And what that meant was I had to put myself through a bunch of crucibles to gain the warrior mentality. Some guys are born with it. I believe that. Some guys are born because they have some great childhood and their dad's tough on them and they build this mental toughness and this discipline in this kid. I didn't have this. So I had to design a crucible to put myself through to gain this warrior mentality. So what I mean by warrior mentality, which is why some people take what I say so literally and they just say, my God, you're just crazy, you're gone. No, God had to put some people on this planet Earth to do very dangerous things to protect this country. Love it or not, I'm one of those people. So to have the mentality that I have, to be in a room that's 10 by 10, I have a weapon, I'm outside a door, I don't know what's behind that door. So our job as a SEAL, most of our job is to go behind, open a door, and say, surprise, we're here. The thing about the surprise is I don't know what's behind that door. So to have that kind of mindset to say, I'm gonna look at AK-47 in the face repeatedly, you know what kind of mind it takes to open that door and not be afraid to shut that door and run away? I was building that callous mind through these things, bad waters, so even after I became a SEAL, I was still on the journey to become a better warrior.
Right.
And these races and all these events, I wasn't about being an ultra runner. I saw, first of all, it was about raising money, but also the selfish side of it all was I was building a warrior mentality by putting myself in the crucible of hell at mile 60 of a 135-mile race in Bedwater. What are you thinking? Blisters, shin splints, stretch fractures, peeing blood maybe? What are you going to do now, David? How are you going to get the next 70 miles of this race?
Well, that's when you find out who you are.
Exactly.
You know, it's like everything builds to that moment. It's all about that moment and that decision that you have to make when everything else is stripped away from you.
Right.
That's going to reveal to you who you are.
Exactly who you
and
are.
what your character is. Right.
And what's good about that is a lot of people set these great goals, like they want to do Badwater, or they want to do an Ironman, or they want to be a millionaire, or whatever they want to do. They have these great goal lists, and they're amazing. Goals are important. But what we don't do in life, which is why people quit in SEAL training and they quit in these different things, we don't look at ourselves in the accountability mirror and take care of the number one thing before you start a goal. Let's take care of our insecurities, because they're going to surface when you put yourself in the crucible and you're suffering. You may be the best physically fit person on the planet. If you haven't handled your mind and handled your jealousies, your insecurities, whatever happened to you as a child and in between, they're going to surface at the time when your mind starts to question, why the hell am I out here in this race? What keeps a person in the fight is knowing it's having purpose. Having purpose. Leave the ego at the door, because the ego will kill you every time. You will always quit. So that's why I've been able to get through things, because I know I was a scared, uneducated kid who stuttered and had zero. And I had to look at myself in the mirror and hold myself accountable for who I wasn't and who I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's journey is different. Everybody's journey is different. I was on a journey to see who David Goggins was. And that journey took me in some of the hardest areas a human being can even imagine. And right now at 41, I'm the happiest person on the planet, because, you know, I had to climb Mount Everest several times just to look down on my life to see what hell I came from. And that's what kept me going through all this stuff. Like I envisioned myself going through, like when I was a young kid and they called me all the time. My dad beat the hell out of me and I had no self-esteem. I had this vision of, if I can make it to where I want to go, imagine when I look back on my damn life, how proud I will be. And now I'm here. I'm able to look back on this life I lived that many people will never understand, because why? When you're passionate, they think you're crazy. And you can't even explain to people why you're doing or why you did what you did, because you found your purpose. And once you found your purpose, you can't really explain it to normal people, because they don't understand passion, because they live everyday life just going, not really finding their purpose. So I become a foreign language to people. So they put me in the category of, you're just crazy. No. I'm passionate. I found my purpose in this life. Well, I had to create Goggins, because David Goggins was a weak kid. So I created Goggins. So the crucible of life that I decided to take to become who I wanted to become, I created Goggins. Goggins is the guy talking right now. David Goggins was the kid that got bullied and all these other things, and I created Goggins. None of it was external. I don't care about money. I didn't care about awards. I didn't care about medals. I didn't care about Badwater. I don't care about ultra running. These were all things for me to build the internal in myself. Mm-hmm. So, like, you know, like, people don't get it twisted, man. I did this to be proud of who I am as a human being. And most people live a lie. I hated the lie I lived. And the lie I lived was I was nothing, and I knew I was nothing. And my journey, I wanted to be something. I wanted to be proud of who I was, and it took me in that direction. 2013,
yeah.
I walked 105 miles.
Right.
And I spent 7 hours in the vehicle from having so many issues with my body. And everybody goes, why didn't you quit, man? You could have killed yourself. It's not about that, man. I'm not out here to kill myself. You know, don't get it twisted, man. It was, honestly, at that point, it became a whole new challenge. The challenge was always to do my best. But at that point where I saw my best was done.
Your best on that day, given whatever circumstances God gave you that day.
It was, so I took what God gave me that day and said, well, I had to readjust the goals. And I found happiness and joy and peace. And like, okay, man, we're going to reset this damn boy, and we're going to walk 105 miles.
Right.
And we're going to get to the finish line, and you're going to walk 105 miles of Badwater. It's going to be horrible. And that's what happened. Uh-huh. So once you find, my purpose was pretty much at that time to raise money for a foundation, but I can't say that was my only driving force. When you're in that much pain, I'm sorry, you're not thinking about raising money for a foundation. Right. I'm sorry, I'm human. I had to go dark. And going dark was I had to go to that straight, barbaric, Garanimal mindset of, like, as bad as I was suffering, the suffering, I had to make it work to my advantage. I had to enjoy, I had to embrace the suffering. I had to really see, man, now I'm at mile 70. I've never gone 70 miles before. What if I can go 30 more miles in this situation? I had to talk to myself very differently versus being scared of what I was doing in my body. Because if I thought that way, which a normal person should think that way, but once again, I have a warrior's mentality. I thought the exact opposite. What if I get through this being this messed up? And it sparked my endorphins to say, if I can go 100 miles or 30 more miles this messed up, where most human beings couldn't. I just did the what if.
Right.
And I saw myself finishing this race and the feeling I would have after I finished it, and it got me through it. A lot of us are being forced into solitude right now, in our homes, apartments, wherever we live. But we're also being forced into solitude in our own minds. Life is the most brutal endurance sport of all time. And that's what we have to love about it. We have to flip it on its head and love the fact that life continues to attack us. There are no fucking timeouts. You can't just go like in a fucking sporting event when the coach doesn't like something and call a timeout. You have to figure shit out on the fly. You have to be that person who's always prepared. But the solitude right now that a lot of us are dealing with is what we don't want to deal with. It's the fact that we have to think about all these things that we don't like about ourselves. We like to use life as a big escape. That escape is not there anymore. All these distractions that we use, they're no longer there. This is the time right now for you to stop avoiding things. Get that pen and paper out. Look inside yourself. Stop looking at me or other people out here to be the hero of your story. This is time for you right now in all that solitude to get to know who you are as a person. Be alone with yourself. Write that shit down. Start to face these different things in life. Knowing one thing in life, we are all very fragile in this world. We have to know that when we die with some meaning and some purpose in this world. Stay hard.
Someone else's comment is unlikely to bring you to a halt unless you value that comment. So imagine you're going to pursue a goal, but you're full of doubts. And so 40% of you is doubts and 60% of you is pursuing the goal. And then 5 or 6 people object, and they object using the doubts. Well, that's going to be really hard on you.
So how do we overcome the self-doubt?
Well, partly what that means is you probably haven't thought it through completely. Like, what are you doing and why? And if you have a bunch of doubts and they haven't been addressed, then you're vulnerable at that point. And it may be that your goal is not everything it could be. And it may be that your strategy isn't fully fleshed out. And so you have to have a conversation with your doubts and take them seriously and see if you can construct a goal that you're on board with. And then a doubt pops up because someone criticizes you and triggers a doubt, and you look at the doubt and you think, okay, here's the doubt and this is why what I'm doing, maybe won't work. But then you think, but I've thought this through and I've thought this through and I've thought this through, and that all works. And so, no, that isn't going to stop me. So I look and I think, well, I'm writing something. Why? Well, I want to figure out this problem. I want to think about this problem. Why? Well, it's an engaging problem, but it's a problem that many people seem to have, so that discussing it and figuring it out seems to be useful. Why? Well, because the more of us who take problems seriously and try to address them and communicate about them, the fewer problems we might have and the less suffering there'll be. And suffering doesn't seem to be a good thing, unnecessary suffering. Maybe we could work towards it, and maybe that's what I should be doing, and that seems to be what's ethical, and that's it. And you might say, well, what if you doubt that doing what's ethical is right? Well, it's not that easy to construct an argument that supports the idea that having more unnecessary suffering in the world is good. So I would say, you want to put yourself on firm moral foundations. And people talk about morality all the time. This is what you should do, or you're a bad person. It's arbitrary. It's got this ring of patriarchal tyranny. But that's based on a misapprehension of what morality is. It's like Do you want to be tortured by your conscience? Like, how pleasant do you find it to be tortured by your conscience?
It's horrible.
How horrible? Like, is there anything worse?
Excruciating, yeah. I don't know if there's anything worse. I mean,
It's up there.
you gotta live with it, yeah, for as long as you have it.
Yeah, well, I think that's a universal experience, or near universal experience. So you live ethically when you're not violating your conscience. Well, there isn't anything better than that. That might not be good enough. It might not even be good. Like, let's say you manage it. Things can still come along and take you out sideways. But the purpose of living ethically is so that you have some peace. Look around for something that bothers you and see if you can fix it. So now you think, well, let's say you go into you can do this in a room. It's quite fun to do it just when you're sitting in a room, like a room, maybe your bedroom. You can sit there and just sort of meditate on it and think, okay, if I wanted to spend 10 minutes making this room better, what would I have to do? And you have to ask yourself that, right? It's not a command, it's like a genuine question. And things will pop out in the room that you like, there's a stack of papers over there that's kind of bugging you, and you know that maybe little order there would be a good thing, and there's some rubbish behind your computer monitor that you haven't attended to for like 6 months, and the room would be slightly better if it was a little less dusty and the cables weren't all tangled up the same way. And like, if you allow yourself just to consider the expanse in which you exist at that moment, there'll be all sorts of things that'll pop out in it that you could just fix. And I might say, well, if you were coming to see me for psychotherapy, the easiest thing for us to do first would just be to get you to organize your room. You think, well, is that psychotherapy? And the answer is, well, it depends on how you conceive the limits of your being. And I would say, start where you can start. If something announces itself to you, which is a strange way of thinking about it, as in need of repair, that you could repair, then hey, fix it. You fix 100 things like that, your life will be a lot different. I often tell people too, fix the things you repeat every day, because people tend to think of those as trivial, right? You get up, you brush your teeth, you have your breakfast, you have your routines that you go through every day. Well, those probably constitute 50% of your life. And people think, well, they're mundane, I don't need to pay attention to them. It's like, no, that's exactly wrong. The things you do every day, those are the most important things you do. Hands down. All you have to do is do the arithmetic. You figure it out right away. So 100 adjustments to your broader domain of being, and there's a lot less rubbish around, and a lot fewer traps for you to step into. And so that's in keeping with Jung's idea about erasing once you've got your mind and your emotions together, and once you're acting that out, then you can extend what you're willing to consider yourself and start fixing up the things that are part of your broader extent. Now, sometimes you don't know how to do that. So you might say, imagine you're walking down Bloor Street and there's this guy who's like alcoholic and schizophrenic and has been on the streets for 10 years. He sort of stumbled towards you and, incoherently mutters something. That's a problem. And it would be good if you could fix it, but you haven't got a clue about how to fix that. You just walk around that and go find something that you could fix, because if you muck about in that, not only is it unlikely that you'll help that person, it's very likely that you'll get hurt yourself. So, just because while you're experiencing things announce themselves as in need of repair, doesn't mean that it's you right then and there that should repair them. You have to have some humility. You don't walk up to a helicopter that isn't working and just start tinkering away with it. You have to stay within your domain of competence. But most of the time, if people look at their lives, it's a very interesting thing to do. I like the idea of the room, because you can do that at the drop of a hat. You go back to where you live and sit down and think, okay, I'm going to make this place better for half an hour. What should I do? And you have to ask, and things will just pop up like mad. And it's partly because your mind is a very strange thing. As soon as you give it a name, a genuine aim, it'll reconfigure the world in keeping with that aim. That's actually how you see to begin with. And so if you set it a task, especially, you have to be genuine about it, which is why you have to bring your thoughts and emotions together, and then you have to get them in your body so you're acting consistently. You have to be genuine about the aim, but once you aim, the world will reconfigure itself around that aim, which is very strange. And that, man, if you can get one thing through your head as a consequence of even being in university, that would be a good one. You see what you aim at. And so, because one inference you might draw from that is, be careful what you aim at, right? What you aim at determines the way the world manifests itself to you. And so if the world is manifesting itself in a very negative way, one thing to ask is, are you aiming at the right thing? Now, I'm not trying to reduce everybody's problems to an improper aim. People get cut off at the knees for all sorts of reasons. They get sick, they have accidents. There's a random element to being, that's for sure. And so you don't want to take anything, even that particular phrase, too far. You want to bind it with the fact that random things do happen to people, but it's still a great thing to ask.
I think it relates back to this idea of an ideal. Is a person what he or she is, or is the person most properly understood as what they could become? And I think we understand ourselves essentially in terms of what we believe we could become. Our conscience upbraids us for failure to move in that direction. And so one of the things you do if you challenge yourself is you attempt to transform yourself through tempering into that which you could be. And we're always becoming. We're not static entities, and we always exist in relationship to this ideal. And so the religious pursuit is an attempt to specify the ideal and also to specify it communally. And then we could say, well, you impose challenges to yourself to facilitate your transformation toward the ideal. And everyone understands that. Well, of course you do that. And you ever meet someone who isn't upbraided by their conscience for not being more than they are? I don't think such a person exists. Maybe the hypothetical psychopath. So, and the gratitude, I would say, that's also, insofar as it can be manifested, that's also a decision. Because you could say, the antinatalists, the people who think consciousness is so unbearable that it should just be eradicated, they think, well, the world is so corrupt and so rife with suffering that it would be better if it didn't exist at all. And you can make a perfectly logical case for that. Dostoevsky did it all the time in his novels. So, well, you can take the opposite tack and live out that. And that's a decision. To be grateful is something to strive for. It's something to attempt to manifest, like to be truthful. And it is in spite of your suffering, because the suffering can be absolutely overwhelming. It can be unbearable.
You might have been through something harder. Others have certainly been through something harder. The complaints of the modern world they can't even compare to even 50, 100 years ago. I mean, it's unbelievable what our ancestors not too far from now dealt with. And
yes, and you can say there's something,
that really gets into gratitude
in you that's greater than you think that you could call on. And the evidence is that other people have gone through this. And that isn't so much, again, pointing to a lack in you necessarily as it is something that's hopeful.
What you can be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you say, there's a psychologist, Carl Rogers, and he thought you should have unconditional positive regard for your clients. And I don't believe that's true. You should have unconditional positive regard for the parts of your clients that are trying to get better. Now, that doesn't mean you criticize and deal harshly with the other elements. That's not the point. The point is, when you're dealing with someone, are you dealing with who they are, or are you trying to foster who they could be? And which is the better attitude? And it's certainly the case with young people, and perhaps with all of us, that we like to interact with people who are calling out the best in us.
If you configure your life so that what you are genuinely doing is aiming at the highest possible good,
then the things that you need to survive and to thrive on a day-to-day basis will deliver themselves to you. That's a hypothesis, and it's not some simple hypothesis, right? Because what it basically says is, if you dare to do the most difficult thing that you can conceptualize, your life will work out better than it will if you do anything else. Well, how are you going to find out if that's true? Well, it's a Kierkegaardian leap of faith. There's no way you're going to find out whether or not that's true unless you do it. So no one can tell you either, because just because it works for someone else, I mean, that's interesting and all that, but it's no proof that it'll work for you. You have to be all in this game. And so the idea is, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. It's like, that's actually a fairly important caution when you're talking about not having to pay attention to what you're going to eat or what you're going to wear. It's like, what it's essentially saying is that those problems are trivial in comparison. And the probability is that if you manifest yourself properly in the world, that those things will come your way is extraordinarily high. And I believe that that's exactly right. I mean, I've watched people operate in the world, and I would say that there is no more effective way of operating in the world than to conceptualize the highest good that you can and then strive to attain it. There's no more practical pathway to the kind of success that you could have if you actually knew what success was. And so that's what this sermon is attempting to posit. It's like in the story of Pinocchio. You know, what happens at the beginning of the story of Pinocchio is that Geppetto wishes on a star. We talked about that a little bit. And so what Geppetto does is align himself with the metaphorical manifestation of the highest good he can conceptualize, and he makes a commitment. Let's say he aims at the star, and for him the star is the possibility that he can take his creation, a puppet, right, whose strings are being pulled by unseen forces, and have it transform into something that's autonomous and real. Well, that's a hell of an ambition. You know, and we're wise enough to put that in a children's movie, but too foolish to understand what it means. It's such an interesting juxtaposition that we can both know that and not know it at the same time. You can go to the movie, you can watch it, and it makes sense, but that doesn't mean that you can go home and think, well, I know what that meant. Well, people are complicated, right? We exist at different levels, and all the levels don't communicate with one another, but the movie is a hypothesis, and the hypothesis is there's no better pathway to self-realization and the ennoblement of being than to posit the highest good that you can conceive of and commit yourself to it. And then you might also ask yourself, and this is definitely worth asking, is, do you really have anything better to do? And if you don't, well, why would you do anything else? You know, you remember the old fable of the grasshopper and the ant? Maybe not. I'm not going to tell it, but the ant works and the grasshopper fiddles, and the ant has a pretty good time in the winter and the grasshopper dies. And so this is like a pro-grasshopper line, but it's not, because it says something else. It says that if you orient yourself properly and then pay attention to what you do every day, that works. And I actually think that that's in accordance with what we have come to understand about human perception, because what happens is that the world shifts itself around your aim, because you're a creature that has an aim. You have to have an aim in order to do something. You're an aiming creature. You look at a point and you move towards it. It's built right into you. And so you have an aim. Well, let's say your aim is the highest possible aim. Well, then, so that sets up the world around you. It organizes all of your perceptions. It organizes what you see and you don't see. It organizes your emotions and your motivations. So you organize yourself around that aim, and then what happens is the day manifests itself as a set of challenges and problems, and if you solve them properly, then you stay on the pathway towards that aim, and you can concentrate on the day, and so that way you get to have your cake and eat it too, because you can point into the distance, the far distance, and you can live in the day. And it seems to me that that's
That makes every moment of the day supercharged with meaning. That's how, because if everything that you're doing every day is related to the highest possible aim that you can conceptualize, well, that's the very definition of the meaning that would sustain you in your life. Well, and then the issue is, well, back to Noah, well, all hell's about to break loose and chaos is coming. It's like when that's happening in your life, you might want to be doing something that you regard as truly worthwhile, because that's what will keep you afloat when everything is flooded. You might say, well, what would you want to be king? You could say king of the world or king of your own soul. What do you want to subordinate yourself to? How about your heroic willingness to encounter the unknown and articulate it and share that with people? There's no nobler vision than that. And I don't see that it's merely arbitrary. And it's not merely arbitrary too, because if you do that, to the degree that you do that, assuming your society isn't entirely corrupt, you will be successful. It will actually aid you practically. You'll rise up above men. You'll be selected by women. You'll be admirable. You'll be valued. And you know that because if you look at the people that you admire and value, again, unless you've taken a detour into dark places and are possessed with admiration for people who are working for malevolent purposes and for destruction, you just have to watch the people that you admire and try to figure out what's common across them and draw your own conclusions. And you can ask yourself too, when you're torturing yourself with your conscience because you're not doing what you should be and you know it, what is it that you're torturing yourself in relationship to? You have a vision of your own ideal and you torment yourself if you're not matching it. What's the ideal? Well, you don't know, right? It's kind of incoherent and poorly articulated, but that doesn't mean it isn't trying to manifest itself and make itself known to you.
Your ability to focus, and in fact, your ability of neurons to encode specific information in your environment, that is, to represent what's out there in the world, is actually related to your blood glucose level. Now, here I'm setting aside the discussion of ketosis and ketogenic diets for the moment. But there's a beautiful study that was published in Neuron not long ago that showed that the tuning, that is, the precision with which neurons in the brain represent things in our environment, is actually much greater when there is sufficient glucose in the brain. Translated into English, this means that when we are fasted or when our blood glucose is very low, we aren't able to perceive and think about things as clearly. Now, there's a twist to this, however. Many people who practice intermittent fasting, and I should say I practice a sort of pseudo-intermittent fasting. I generally eat my meals between the hours of 11 a.m. and 8 p.m., although sometimes there's some wiggle around that. Occasionally I have an early breakfast. I'm not super rigid about it. But I know there are a number of people who are doing longer fasts, or they're eating in a 6-hour window. We did an entire episode about fasting. You can, again, find that at hubermanlab.com. Intermittent fasting has a lot of different potential benefits. For some people, it's a convenient way to restrict their calories. For other people, it's a convenient way to avoid eating. That is, it's easier to not eat than to eat a small portion, so they opt for intermittent fasting, and so on and so forth. But one of the things that you hear very often is that some people like being fasted because they like the clarity of mind that it provides. Here's the situation. Neurons, unless you're in a ketogenic diet, really thrive on glucose. They love glucose. And as I mentioned before, your ability to think and perceive things is actually enhanced by having sufficient glucose in your bloodstream. So why would it be that some people experience a heightened state of mental clarity when they are fasted? I've certainly experienced that before. Well, I should say that provided you're well hydrated enough and you have enough electrolytes in your system, what tends to happen is that when you ingest food, there's a shift in your nervous system towards so-called parasympathetic mode. That is, the more relaxed, you probably heard it as rest and digest, although it does other things, a more relaxed mode that can indeed make us very sleepy. If we have too many carbohydrates, it actually can make us quite sleepy. However, if we have any food, if we have enough of it, that is, if our gut is full, it diverts blood to our gut and we become sleepy and we can't focus as well. So a lot of people really like fasting in the state of being fasted for focus and concentration because they don't have as much of that parasympathetic activation. They're just not as sleepy. And in fact, under those conditions, half as much caffeine will give you just as much lift as twice as much caffeine will give you on a full belly of pasta. And that's just the way that caffeine interacts with blood glucose. So what I'd like you to imagine is if you had a measure of focus from 0 to 10, these are arbitrary units, 10 being maximally focused and 0 being not focused at all. Imagine a U-shaped function, right? Where if you're very fasted, you're going to have a high degree of focus and concentration. But then if you ingest some food and your belly is full, your focus and concentration is reduced. But having enough blood glucose and maybe even elevated blood glucose will increase cognitive function. So there are two ends of the spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, blood glucose is relatively low and you're fasted and you can think and behave in a very concentrated way. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have a lot of blood glucose, or I should say sufficient blood glucose. You never want your blood glucose to be too high. And that allows your neurons to encode and perceive and basically allow you to think really clearly. So you sort of have to pick your condition. What do you want for your bouts of focus and concentration? I actually do both. So what I do is, as I mentioned before, I eat my meal sometime around 11 a.m., my first meal typically, unless I'm very hungry when I wake up. And so I will do my workout and one bout of focused work. I always think of this as my hard work early in the day. And I do that fasted. I'll be consuming water with electrolytes, maybe Element or other electrolytes, maybe some caffeine as well in the form of yerba mate or coffee. That's my first focus bout of 90 minutes or less. That is essentially done fasted. And then I'll eat. And then I do notice after I eat, I actually have a diminished capacity to focus. But then again in the afternoon, I will do another 90-minute bout of focus. And I'll talk about some of the tools I use to make sure that that bout of focus is optimal for getting the most amount of focused work done, whether or not it's mental work or physical work, although I tend to do my physical work early in the day and my mental work both early and late in the day. To make this very simple, or as simple as I can for you, being fasted is great for focus and concentration, provided you're not thinking about food the entire time. And being fed is terrific for focus and concentration. It actually can improve neuronal function, provided that you didn't eat too much food. So one way to manage this is if you're going to have a lunch, to make sure that you don't stuff yourself at lunch, that you're not overeating, and to not get quite so full that you push your nervous system into this parasympathetic mode and make it hard to focus in the afternoon. I know a lot of people experience a dip or even a crash in energy in the afternoon that make it really hard to focus. For that reason, I'll just remind people of a tool I've talked about many times before, which is based on the biology of adenosine and caffeine, etc., which is to delay your first caffeine intake to 90 to 120 minutes after waking up. I know that can be painful for certain people. I violate that rule when I'm working out very early in the morning. I'll drink my caffeine before my workout, which often occurs within 30 to 60 minutes of waking. But in general, unless I'm working out very early, I will ingest my caffeine 90 to 120 minutes after I wake up. So again, I want to emphasize that if you hear somebody out there say being fasted is optimal for focus and concentration, well, that is true in one context and perhaps ideal for a certain part of the day. And other people will say, no, neurons run on glucose. You need glucose in your bloodstream in order to get those neurons to be tuned. That is, to respond with electrical activity in the optimal way when you're reading something or when you're trying to perform exercise. Well, that's also true. And of course, you can incorporate both. In fact, as I just described, incorporate both fasted states and fed states in order to optimize my concentration and focus. I know many people are curious as to whether or not caffeine can improve focus and concentration, and indeed it can. There is an immense amount of data supporting the idea that caffeine, provided it's consumed in the appropriate dosages, can improve mental performance and physical performance, and it largely does that through improvements in focus and concentration. The dosage of caffeine, of course, is going to depend on how caffeine adapted you are, how much caffeine tolerance you have. And that is going to vary tremendously depending on whether or not you ingest that caffeine with or without food, as I mentioned earlier. But there is a kind of general range in which we can talk about caffeine as being useful for focus and concentration. And the range is basically from 100 milligrams to 400 milligrams. I want to caution everybody out there, if you're somebody who suffers from anxiety or panic attacks and you're not used to ingesting caffeine and you run out and ingest 400 milligrams of caffeine in the form of espresso or yerba mate or an energy drink or in pill form, that is going to be very uncomfortable for you. You're going to be sweating profusely, your heart rate is going to increase, you're going to be quite panicked, in fact, or at least anxious. So be cautious with your use and adopting of caffeine if you're not already caffeine adapted. But most people do quite well to ingest 100 to 200 milligrams of caffeine prior to doing some focused work. And again, I recommend delaying your caffeine intake to 90 to 120 minutes after waking, unless you are using that caffeine to really jolt your system before a workout. Caffeine can, of course, be ingested in various forms, even pill form, but most people ingest it in the form of coffee, or my particular favorite way to ingest caffeine is yerba mate. It is important, and I should note that you should actively avoid the smoked versions of yerba mate, as they contain a lot of carcinogenic, cancer-promoting compounds. There's some great yerba mate brands out there. The most cost-effective way to consume it would be to use the loose leaf tea and to pour water over that. There's one particular brand that I like. I don't have any affiliation to them whatsoever, but I've been using it for years. It's Anna Park. It's an organic brand that is sold. I buy mine on Amazon, but you can find it elsewhere on the internet as well. Again, I don't have any affiliation to them. It's just very cost-effective, very clean. It doesn't have the smoked flavor. At least the one that I buy is not the smoked variety, so none of the carcinogenic compounds are in there, at least that I'm aware of. And I like the way it tastes, and it provides a very even lift and stimulant that I think certainly works for me, and that a number of people I know that have suggested to also enjoy. Yerba mate or caffeine also have other additional benefits. In particular, the caffeine in yerba mate and coffee and other sources of caffeine are known to increase the density and efficacy, that is the number and the function of dopamine receptors. And this has been shown in humans several times. So by ingesting caffeine pretty regularly, you're actually increasing the ability of dopamine to have this effect of increasing motivation and drive. I tend to ingest caffeine only early in the day. I tend to cut off my caffeine intake somewhere around 1 or 2 p.m. to ensure that I can get into a good night's sleep. But I realize that there are people out there that ingest caffeine as late as 2 or 3 in the afternoon and can still sleep fine. I will caution those of you that think that you can drink caffeine in the evening or nighttime and still fall asleep. All of the research points to the fact that the architecture of your sleep and the depth of your sleep is disrupted. Even if you're able to fall and stay asleep, the sleep you're getting is simply not as good as the sleep you would get if you were to shut off your caffeine intake at least 8 hours before bedtime, and ideally more like 10 or even 12 hours before bedtime. But of course, there are practical constraints as well. Okay, so caffeine is increasing dopamine's function by changing the number and efficacy of dopamine receptors. But of course, it also increases our wakefulness, our alertness. And that is largely through the neurochemical systems related to adenosine, which is a molecule that builds up in our brain and body the longer we are awake. It's part of the sleepiness system, if you will. It makes us feel fatigued or tired. And caffeine also operates on the epinephrine, the adrenaline system. In fact, if we ingest too much caffeine, we'll sometimes get the jitters. Those jitters are really the sympathetic, as it's called, nervous system's bias toward movement. And our pupils will dilate. They actually get broader. Now, somewhat paradoxically, when our pupils get bigger, the pupils of our eyes, that is, our visual world actually narrows. It becomes more tunnel-like. A lot of people don't realize this. When our pupils are really small, that means we are relaxed. So if you ever see someone with really tiny or pin-sized pupils, they're very relaxed. If their pupils are very big, they're very dilated, well then they are very amped up. They are very, very alert. Caffeine increases alertness by increasing epinephrine, adrenaline release, both in the brain and within the body. And so that's another way that it facilitates focus and concentration. One of the great challenges in assigning a good, giving a good answer to the question of like, what's the meaning of life is, I think, illustrated best by the Viktor Frankl example, although there are other examples too, which is that our sense of meaning is very elastic in time and space. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, but it's amazing to me that somebody locked in a cell or a concentration camp can bring the horizon in close enough that they can then micro slice their environment so that they can find rewards and meaning and power and beauty, even in a little square box or a horrible situation. And I think this really speaks to one of the most important features of the human mind, which is let's take two opposite extremes. One would be, let's say the alarm went off right now in this building and the building started shaking. Our vision, our hearing, everything would be tuned to this space-time bubble for those moments. And everything that we would process, all that would matter, the only meaning would be get out of here safe, figure out what's going on, contact loved ones, etc. If we were to sit back totally relaxed, we could do the, I think it's called pale blue dot thing or whatever, where we could imagine ourselves in this room, and then they were in the United States and this continent and the earth, and then it's peering down us. Yeah. And all of a sudden you get back, it can seem so big that all of a sudden it's meaningless, right? If you see yourself as just one brief glimmer in all of time and all of space, you go to, I don't matter. And if you go to, every little thing that happens in this text thread or this, comment section on YouTube or Instagram, your space-time bubble is tiny, then everything seems inflated, and the brain will contract and dilate its space-time vision and time, but also sense of meaning. And that's beautiful, and it's what allows us to be so dynamic in different environments, and we can pull from the past and the present and future. It's why examples like Nelson Mandela and Viktor Frankl had to include. It makes sense that it wasn't just about grinding it out. They had to find those dopamine rewards even in those little boxes they were forced into. So I'm not trying to dodge an answer, but for me personally, and I think about this a lot because I have this complicated history in science where my undergraduate, graduate advisor, and postdoctoral advisor all died young. So, and they were wonderful people and had immense importance in my life. But what I realized is that we can get so fixated on the thing that we're experiencing holding tremendous meaning, but it only holds that meaning for as long as we're in that space-time regime. And this is important because what really gives meaning is the understanding that you can move between these different space-time dimensionalities. And I'm not trying to sound like a theoretical physicist or anyone that thinks about the cosmos in saying that. It's really the fact that sometimes we say and do and think things and it feels so important, and then 2 days later we're like, what happened? Well, you had a different brain processing algorithm entirely. You were in a completely different state. And so what I want to do in this lifetime is I want to engage in as many different levels of contraction and dilation of meaning as possible. I want to go to the micro. I sometimes think about this. I'm like, if I just pulled over the side of the road, I bet you there's an anthill there and their whole world is fascinating. You can't stay there. And you also can't stay staring up at the clouds and just think about how we're just these little beings and it doesn't matter. The key is the journey back and forth, up and down that staircase, back and forth and back and forth. And my goal is to get as many trips up and down that staircase as I can before the Reaper comes for me. The way I think about trying to build up resilience, physically or mentally or otherwise, is one of, I guess we could call it, I like to call it limbic friction. That's not a real scientific term, and I acknowledge that. I'm making it up now because I think it captures the concept, which is that, we always hear about resilience. It makes it sound like, under stress where everything's coming at you, you're going to stay calm. But there's another, so the limbic system wants to pull you in some direction, typically in the direction of reflexive behavior. And the prefrontal cortex, through top-down mechanisms, has to suppress that and say, no, we're not going to respond to the banging of the coffee cups behind me, or I'm going to keep focusing. That's pure top-down control. So limbic friction is high in that environment. You put yourself into a high limbic friction environment, meaning that the prefrontal cortex has to work really hard. But there's another side to limbic friction too, which is when you're very sleepy, there's nothing incoming. It can be completely silent. And it's hard to engage and focus because you're drifting off and you're getting sleepy. So their limbic friction is high, but for the opposite reason, autonomic arousal is too low. So they're turning on Netflix in the background or looping a song might boost your level of alertness that will allow top-down control to be in the exactly the sweet spot you want it. So this is why earlier I was saying it's all about how we feel inside relative to what's going on the outside. We're constantly in this. I guess one way you could envision it spatially, especially if people are listening to this just on audio, is I like to think about it kind of like a glass barbell, where one sphere of perception and attention
can be on what's going on with me, and one sphere of attention can be on what's going on with you or something else in the room or in my environment. But this barbell isn't rigid. It's not really glass. Would plasma work here? I don't know anything about plasma. Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. But so imagine that this thing can contort. The size of the globes at the end of this barbell can get bigger or smaller. So let's say I close my eyes and I bring all my experience into what's going on through interoception internally. Now it's as if I've got two orbs of perception just on my internal state, but I can also do the opposite and bring both orbs of perception outside me. I'm not thinking about my heart rate or my breathing. I'm just thinking about something I see. And what you'll start to realize as you kind of use this spatial model is that two things. One is that it's very dynamic, and that the more relaxed we are, the more these two orbs of attention, the two ends of the barbell, can move around freely. The more alert we are, the more rigid they're going to be tethered in place. And that was designed so that if I have a threat in my environment, it's tethered to that threat. I'm not going to be, if something's coming to attack me, I'm not going to be like, oh, my breathing cadence is a little bit quick. That's not how it works. Why? Because both orbs are linked to that threat. And so my behavior is now actually being driven by something external, even though I think it's internal. And so I don't want to get too abstract here because I'm a neuroscientist, I'm not a theorist. But when you start thinking about models of how the brain works, there are only really three things that neurons do. They're either sensory neurons, they're motor neurons, or they're modulating things. And the models of attention and perception that we have now, 2020, tell us that we've got interoception and exteroception. They're strongly modulated by levels of autonomic arousal. And that if we want to form the optimal relationship to some task or some pressure or something, whether or not it's sleep, an impending threat, or coding, we need to adjust our internal space-time relationship with the external space-time relationship. And I realize I'm repeating what I said earlier, but we can actually assign circuitry to this stuff. It mostly has to do with how much limbic friction there is, how much you're being pulled to some source. That source could be internal. If I have pain, physical pain in my body, I'm going to be much more interoceptive than I am exteroceptive. You could be talking to me and I'm just going to be thinking about that pain. It's very hard. And the other thing that we can link it to is top-down control, meaning anything in our environment that has a lot of salience will tend to bring us into more exteroception than interoception. And again, I don't want to litter the conversation with just a bunch of terms, but what I think it can be useful for people is to do what essentially you've done, Lex, is to start developing an awareness. When I wake up, am I mostly in a mode of interoception or exteroception? When I work well, what does working well look like from the perspective of autonomic arousal? How alert or calm am I? What kind of balance between internal focus and external focus is there? And to sort of watch this process throughout the day.
First thing you have to do is just to calm your mind down. The very first thing you have to do is don't give yourself a way out. Okay. You got to trick yourself also and say, you know what? I might quit, but I'm not gonna quit right now. I might quit, but not now. Okay. So that kind of calms your mind down. Because if your mind knows, I'm not gonna quit, it starts spazzing out even more. You're not gonna quit, but let your mind think it has a little control over you. Give it a little cookie. Give it a little cookie, and then you can start processing. Sit there, calm it down, process. That's the first step in the whole journey. Is you cannot spaz out when things get hard. And then when you're able to calm down, you're able to think. If you're under a panic situation and your mind is spastic, are you in control? No one is. And that's what I realized. The worst decisions I make in my entire life is when my mind has said, let's get the hell out of here. We're done, this sucks, I'm over it. So that's the first thing in the whole process. And then realized, I call it the cookie jar. Something I invented years ago is you have to have something that fuels you in this time. So once you calm down, what's going to get you out of the chair? What's going to get you moving forward? You got to remember that I've been in times just as hard as this. So I reflected back on my life. I had a rough childhood, a rough upbringing that I talk a lot about in my book. So basically, that's kind of what I use. I use these different tools to get myself from point A to point B, and it's a process. So back in the day, what motivated me was overcoming myself. I saw myself as a very weak individual, and I wanted to overcome myself. And once I started reaching these different hurdles, I realized that we all had this superhuman potential. Now at 43 years old, I believe in being a leader. And there's a lot of times, like there's no need for me to get up in the morning time and go out for these long runs. I've done it all. I'm good. I'm retired from the military, did 21 years in the military. I've done it all. Now it's about setting the example for others to follow. So what keeps me going now is everyone wants to know, how do you become a leader? How are you a leader? Being a leader is sometimes the worst job in the world because you have to put yourself in some of the most uncomfortable situations of all time. For me to tell you to do something and I'm not doing it myself, that's what motivates me now. That's what keeps me going now, is that I have to continue to set the example. I can't talk it, I have to live it. You know, I believe that I can't talk about what I used to be. I used to be this guy that broke pull-up records. I used to be this guy that ran 100 miles, ran 200 miles. I have to still be that guy. And then when I'm not that guy anymore, I shut up talking about it. So I prioritize trying to win the battle in the morning. So I always win the battle in the morning. So I get morning time, every morning I go for a run. That's the first thing I do every morning. Haven't taken a day off of running since December 2016. Every day, up in the morning. So I also stretch out every day for about 2 to 3 hours. Every day. I've missed 2 days in about 5.5, 6 years. So that's just my routine. And about 4 days a week, I'm in the gym hitting the weights. Because you know, you can't just be a runner. So this is every single day, the monotony of my life. But this is what builds discipline. You know, and not everybody, I'm not telling everybody to do this, but this is my lifestyle. This is how I build self-discipline. I was that guy, if I was on deployment and we got off an op at 1 o'clock in the morning, I was in the gym at 1:05 in the morning. Every single day of my life in the military, no matter what I was doing, I gave 100%. So at 21 years, I was good with it. I went through 2 heart surgeries. I went from anywhere deploying. I was a recruiter in the Navy SEALs. I was an instructor as a Navy SEAL. I did it all, but the whole time, I also lived like it was day one, week one of BUD/S. Even after I graduated Navy SEAL training, a lot of people who graduate something that's hard like that, they get comfortable. Even the biggest, baddest person in the world, they get comfortable. Every day of my entire life, I lived like it was day one, week one of BUD/S. And so I take a lot of pride in that. That's why I don't miss anything. Because basically it was extremely hard to deploy, to be in workups where you're training to be deployed and you're getting up early, getting after it, and you're still maintaining a high level of PT. Every day, push-ups, sit-ups, running every single day, along with doing the job as a SEAL. A lot of guys don't do that. But I learned that you have to be a good individual first. You have to triple down on your weaknesses, because a lot of times, like, you always count on your buddy next to you to help you out. Sometimes that buddy's not going to be there. You got to make sure that you are a jack of all trades and a master of all trades. And that's one thing, you got to have your buddy's back, they got to have your back, but you got to work on yourself every single day. And that's one thing that the military has to really, really triple down on. Is something that we're missing nowadays a lot, is that total accountability of every day, going back to boot camp in your mind. You may have boot camp sucks. SEAL training sucks. All these things suck, and people are so happy to get out of it, but that's what makes you good. Remember how you were when you got out of boot camp? You're kind of all like robotic and locked in, and then it slowly goes away. You get comfortable, you start to sag a little bit, start to walk around. You start to lose that militant discipline. That's the one thing I learned not to do in the military, is the military teaches you these great codes, ethics, morals, values. You gotta continue to work on those. Like everything, it's a muscle. You stop going to the gym, you stop running, you get weak. The military teaches you these great values of strength and honor and code and all these other things. But what we do is we don't keep up the discipline of all that stuff, and we lose it. So the one thing I learned is to not lose that thing, that boot camp, SEAL training, whatever you go through, whatever your A school is, whatever it is, keep that discipline up. That's the biggest thing. Even when I was going through my own hard times, like in pararescue training, when something got hard, my mind would spaz out and I would quit immediately. I didn't know how to handle it. I started realizing that you have to learn to control your mind in these situations. Okay. So at mile 70, when I was in the worst shape of my entire life, I was able to draw on being calm. Calm the emotion down. Emotion controls us. Emotion cannot control us. So I got a hold of my emotions, I calmed down, and I was able to really just sit there and say, okay, I'm in the worst shape of my entire life. I should quit, but let's not quit yet. You're dizzy, let's not get dizzy. So let's get some hydration, let's get some salt, some potassium, let's get some more nutrition in your body. I wasn't dizzy anymore. That's the first step. So then I said, okay, let's see if I can stand up. So I was able to stand up. So I wasn't thinking about, I have 30 more miles to go.
You're just going little steps.
I was going little steps.
Okay.
Okay, you know what? It's pretty amazing. I ran 70 miles. The furthest I ever gone in my entire life was I did this makeshift 26-mile run like years ago out in Guam with this other guy. So I'm way exceeded that. I've gone 70 miles. The first I ever gone was 26. So I'm thinking, that's kind of cool. So now I'm trying to give myself some energy here. Okay, let's see if we can walk a mile. After being in the worst shape of your life, peeing on yourself, going to the bathroom on yourself, now let's see if you can walk a mile. So I walked a mile. I said, you know what? Let's see if we can walk 2 miles. Walked 2 miles. Got to mile 81, and my crew person said, hey, you're not gonna make the time. I said, let's see if we can run a little bit now. So I was able to run the next 19 miles. So what I realized here, and this is where I stopped scratching the surface and started barreling deep inside human potential, was in this race right here. And I was starting to realize that we start to trap ourselves within our own mind. And our mind is this big barrier, this big wall. And once we get to pain and suffering, that wall gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the mind says, it's time to quit. If we're able to find out different ways to get around that, that's what happened to me, and I got around it. I had to invent this person. David Goggins is an introverted, soft kid that got beat up growing up, and mindset had to lie to create friends, to get friends, to be accepted. So my life has really been about 2 people. Very scary, but 2 people. I had to invent a whole nother human being to get outside of my comfort zone. And that human being became Goggins. Goggins is like the guy that walks out of the phone booth. He's like that Superman that walks out of the phone booth. And I was talking to my fiance today about, it's kind of strange how sometimes I have a conversation between David Goggins, and Goggins will tell David Goggins about the shit he's done. And David Goggins like, what the hell, man? Why are you doing that? That's nuts. So it's kind of this battle between trying to find more of yourself, knowing that the real you is afraid, likes comfort, likes living in a world that likes to pat you on the back, give you the things that you want to hear, not the things that you have to hear to get better. So that's where all this kind of started from. And when people hear this podcast, they're going to hear a lot of things that they're going to want to put a title on me. They're going to definitely want to put a title on me to make themselves feel better. I asked them during this podcast, do not do that. Do not look at what you're going to hear. Put a title on me, because basically what you're doing is you're giving yourself a get out of jail free card. Exactly. That's all you're doing. So all you're doing is saying this guy was some super freak. He found some super thing in his brain that was locked up. He unleashed it and became this guy. It's a fucking lie. Because every day I wake up, I dread the day. I dread the day of what I'm going to bring on myself to get better. You know, I was sitting on the couch, saw this show on Discovery Channel, and that started the process of, I think I want to be a Navy SEAL. So I started calling up different recruiters, walking into some guy said to me, "You're fat and you're black." He was an observant motherfucker. You know, I was 300 pounds, black guy walking, he was very observant. So that kind of went on for a while, and until I met one recruiter. And one recruiter saw something in me that no one else saw and gave me a shot.
And a challenge, right? Come back, lose the weight.
Right. So basically I walked in, I had about 3 months, a little less than 3 months to lose 106 pounds. So I was like, this is fucking impossible, man. I can't do that. And at that time I had no real drive to be a Navy SEAL, to be anything. I just knew something had to change. That I had to, this isn't gonna work, man. This lifestyle that I'm living, something has to change. So I went to work that day and I was spraying for cockroaches, and lo and behold, it's a very bad day at work. I found a whole bunch of cockroaches, rodents. It was a bad restaurant. And I came home, I quit my job that day. I was driving home and I said, I gotta fucking do something. And I said, I'm gonna go home and run 4 miles. And 4 miles is only a quarter mile. And then from there, the story really begins from that point. Well, that's what I realized for myself was I wanted that comfort zone that everybody looks for, that pat on the back. They don't want to hear all the bad shit. They want to hear everything that they're doing right. And I realized that's what kept me in this world. That's what kept me in this world of not accomplishing anything. So what I did was I became that big, bad, nasty motherfucker that you don't want to walk into at nighttime. I became the roughest critic in the world on myself. And that's what changed me. I literally saw myself in the mirror. I saw the truth versus saying, you know, my dad did this to me from beating me, kids in school from calling me did this to me, my life did this to me, my fucked up broken foundation did this to me. I took that and said, you know what, well, some people may help this happen, but now I have to own this. No one's gonna come back to save me. No one's gonna come back on this fucking couch and say, hey, it's okay. You're gonna be okay. No, I'm not. I'm not gonna be okay. I had to realize I had to take a stand. I had to make a real stand. And it was painful to look at who I was, what the world and myself created. It created a very lonely, depressed, insecure man that would do anything just to have a friend. And I saw that as very pathetic. When you look at the truth, it becomes very ugly and pathetic. I'm really good at creating an enemy. I'm really good at creating something that I'm against. And I'm also good at, if you ever tell me something that I cannot do, I'm gonna let you know that I'm doing it. Right. Somehow you're gonna fucking know one way or another that I'm doing it. It may not be like in your face. I may make sure that I run across the daggone world. So then it's on the news and you turn the news on and say, how the hell
did he do that?
I wanna do something that you know I'm here. I'm here. So every time I lose like a big significant amount of weight, I call that recruiter up and say, hey man, I'm here. And before I knew it, man, this guy became almost like my best friend at that time. Because I started actually changing his life. You know, he started seeing, wow, man, like, I'm glad I took a shot on this guy.
Right.
And not only did I lose weight, I had to go back and take the ASVAB test again. It was like a watered down SAT a couple more times just to get in the Navy SEAL. So it was a big process. So that 3 months was packed full of like failures, depression, even more. But what I found out in that whole 3 months, I lived a lifetime. In that 3 months, I started realizing if I can flip these insecurities upside down, if I can flip this fear, if I can flip all this shit that made me this depressed, insecure guy, if I can flip it and make it work for me versus against me, I started seeing the power in failure, the power in insecurity, the power in self-doubt. Because I looked at everybody, it may not be true, but that's how I looked at everybody, as being way above me. I thought to myself, if I can be at the lowest part in the world, in the sewer, and be able to overcome all this shit, I started using that as power. And I slowly started passing the guys from Harvard, the guys from MIT, the guys who were from great families and shit. I'm like, oh my God, I'm catching up. I had nothing. So I started flipping it and using it as power. Well, there's something that I invented a long time ago. And when you have nothing to draw from, I was able to find strength in every molecule of this earth. I'm able to be in a room with nothing, with no motivation, no inspiration, nothing, and find it. So what I did in those situations was I invented this thing called taking souls. When everybody's all fucked up and you're exhausted and you're weak and you're tired and you're looking around and everybody looks as bad as you or even worse, I'm like, you know what? I want to now make a statement. It's the perfect time to make a statement. To let you know where your life ends and mine begins. And so the statement there is, I muster up every bit of strength from their looks on their faces and how they feel, and how I'm gonna now, from my childhood, where I came from, how I was the bottom of the barrel, I'm now amongst all these uncommon people. I'm now going to now make you feel like you're common. So I used their sadness, their weakness, their parts of their life where, God, this sucks. I'm like all poopy pants and messed up. I used that for my strength. And I have this moment of like, let's say we're in the sand, we're running or whatever. I will do a surge. I will do something when everybody's like, how the fuck is he doing this? And from that look on their face, that feeling of, God, man, this guy must be something special. It then surges me further and faster and harder for a long time. So it's energy's everywhere. But the thing is, it's so loud, that voice in your head of pain and suffering and discomfort and I don't want to do this is so loud that you're unable to really calm it down and say, okay, there's something here. It's a patient calm that you have to bring yourself to say, I know I have something here, but that voice is so powerful that it just wants you just to, let's leave.
Right.
We're done. It spazzes you out and you want to go versus saying, let's take a second. Hang on. Before we spaz the fuck out, hang on. And in that moment, you can think clearly and find that strength out there for you.
There's this idea in the New Testament, if you knock, the door will open. You think, well, that's an unbelievably, naively optimistic statement that no one in their right mind would possibly give any credence to. But the world is a very strange place. And it is the case that your perceptions of the world and the personality that you inhabit orients itself around your fundamental goal. You're goal-directed creatures. You look forward. We point at everything. Like we're arrows that are aimed at, we're either aimed at something or at nothing, but we have to be aimed. And if you aim at something, then the probability that something will come out of that is radically enhanced. And it might not even be what you aim at to begin with, but that's okay, because what do you know? Like, you might be aiming wrong. If you aim and then move forward, your perspective will change, and then maybe you can shift your aim, and that's fine, but at least you're moving forward. And then the future you want to create is the future that you create. And you might as well create it, because you don't have anything better to do. The other thing that's so important to realize, and this is part of the issue with regards to fragility, is you're all in on this game. You've already staked your life on it. And so you, as far as I can tell, you might as well stake your life on something that you regard as worthwhile, because you're staking your life anyways. And what's the alternative? You're going to stake your life on something you don't think is worthwhile? It's like, how is that an improvement? There's no improvement in that. And so if you want to plow a better pathway forward, then get out the plow and start working it. And that works way better than you would think. I've often wondered, and I think it's a reasonable thing to wonder, it's like, we're not doing too bad in this world, you know. Things are a lot better than they were 50 years ago. And there's a lot of reason to be optimistic, and there's reason to be pessimistic. But you know, it's not like we're all in making things better. We're maybe 60-40 or 65-35 or something like that, each of us individually and then also collectively. You wonder what would happen if we were all in, just how much better we could make things. And there's something that's worth thinking about. There's something to devote yourself to. It's like, how much suffering could you rectify if that was your goal, your own and other people's as well? And how much malevolence could you constrain? And what amount of good could you do in the world? That's a noble goal, and it's certainly something worth discovering, unless you have something better to do. And it doesn't seem to me that you do. So, well, especially when you think about good, is not as something that's associated with naive adherence to a set of constraining rules, you know, that all good is obedience. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm saying, look, there's problems that are out there in the world, and some of those problems bother you. They're your problems. Right? I don't know why they bother you and some other problems bother someone else, but there are problems that bother you. Those are your problems. Right? That's your call to adventure. Solve them and see who you are. Put your life together and make something better. That's the way to defeat nostalgia for the false past. And don't be so sure you can't do it. I have this program I'll tell you about very briefly because of the effects it's had that have been surprising to us because we've tested this empirically. It's called the Future Authoring Program, and it's on a site called selfauthoring.com. And it's a program that is designed to help people make a plan for their life. And it's a fairly straightforward program in some sense, although not so much in others. I might say, well, what do you want to do with your life? And you think, oh my God, I can't answer that question. It's like, that's a big question. And so you don't know. Part of the problem is it's not a very good question. It's not differentiated enough. So if you ask yourself a question that's so large you can't answer it, well, then you should ask yourself a smaller question. And so in this program, you're asked to do things. We tried to make it practical. It's like, okay, it's 3 to 5 years down the road, and you get to have what you need and want within reason, right? Assuming you're taking care of yourself within reason. Well, what might you want? How would you like your family interactions to be going? Siblings, parents? What about your intimate relationship? If you could have what you wanted and needed from that, just what would that look like, hypothetically? Your career or your job, because those aren't the same thing. At least maybe you could have a job that is respectable and that constitutes a valid contribution to those around you and helps justify your position in society. And perhaps you could even have a career, you know, that has some intrinsic meaning independently of that. Your education, your resistance to the temptation of drugs and alcohol and the sorts of things that knock people off the track, your care for yourself mentally and physically, your use of time productively and in an engaging manner outside of work. You could have what you wanted. What would it be? Answer it. Guess if you have to. And then write for 20 minutes about what your life could be like if all of that manifested itself. And then do the reverse. Write about what your life would be like in 3 to 5 years if you let everything about you that isn't good have full sway and take you to your own little subdivision of hell. And people are pretty aware of that. Everyone knows. Everyone I've ever talked to has some real sense of how they would degenerate if they degenerated in their own particular way. Some people would become cruel. Some people would become homicidal. Some people would become alcoholic. Some people would end up on the street. Some people would drift into prostitution. People know where their weaknesses are likely to tempt them and take them. And so then you sketch out a little hell and a little heaven, and maybe you're motivated to run from the one, which is good, and to run toward the other. And so then you have a framework for your life. And then maybe you make a strategic plan. Well, we've done that now with thousands of people in Holland and in Canada, mostly university students, well, all university students in the research studies. And we found at this little college in Canada, Mohawk College, if you brought students in the summer in their orientation and just had them do this program, which should probably take you about 5 days if you did it thoroughly, if you had them do it really badly in an hour, that decreased the probability that the men would drop out in the first semester by 50%. It was a staggering finding, and we found findings of similar magnitude across the other studies. And the reason I'm telling you this is because a lot of the reason that people don't get what they want is because they don't aim at it. This idea that you should have higher self-esteem or that you should be happy, it's like, Jesus, it's so weak. It's so pathetic. It's like, first of all, forget it, because you're not who you should be and you don't deserve your self-esteem. And second, what good is happiness going to do you when you're unhappy? And you will be. So there's nothing in that to get you out of bed in the morning. You need an adventure, and the greater the better. And so it's back to the high seas, gentlemen. You know, out on the rolling waves where there are new continents to conquer and new things to overcome. And if you think that all the frontiers are gone, then you're not looking, because there's frontiers everywhere, and that's where you should be, right? Working diligently to expand the domain of habitable order into the chaos of potential. And that'll force you to discover who you are and to bring that into the world. And that's the role of men in the 21st century. And there's nothing about that that's anything but good for anyone. I mean, one of the things that I detest about the current collectivist ideology and the insistence that what we live in is a patriarchal tyranny is that it associates the activity of stalwart men with nothing but tyranny and power. And I think that that's dreadful beyond imagining, because it conflates bravery and courage and competence and the desire to adopt responsibility and the ability to be generous with nothing but power. And it gives men, especially young men, an excuse to be useless so that they'll be harmless, so that they won't be destructive. And none of that's helpful. It's like you're a dangerous creature, and that's a good thing. And you should harness that and discipline it towards some impossible goal, one you can barely lift, and see if you can manage to struggle uphill with it. And then things will straighten themselves out. And then we won't have to ask, well, what's the role of men in the 21st century? There are terrible problems that need to be solved. Solve them. It's within our power to solve them. It's within your power to solve the problems that present themselves to you as your problems. Solve them. That's the right solution. And there's nothing in that that isn't good. And there's nothing in it that isn't like that call to adventure that can get you up in the morning when it's a difficult morning, you know, when things have collapsed around you for one reason or another. You need a purpose for moving forward, and it has to be the sort of purpose that justifies the suffering. So that's that. That's part of what tradition is supposed to teach you by presenting you with examples of great people of the past. The lesson is not supposed to be exactly bow down and worship these people. Mm-hmm. It's be like them. Be like them. And you could be. And I mean, that's really the goal of the humanities. When it's the humanities, if that's the goal, then students will study the humanities. As soon as that ceases to be the goal, then there's nothing of value there. I mean, great literature tells you the great story of good and evil, always. It's good and evil against a background of chaos and order, always. And the evil characters are there to be bad examples, and the good characters are there to be good examples, or you see the interplay of those forces within a single person. And it's a reminder of who you could be. And you can find out who you should be. It's actually this is something quite mysterious, I believe, and part of the proof, let's say, that we exist in a world of value. Your conscience tells you who you should be. Now, that doesn't mean that necessarily that it's infallible, but people wrestle with their conscience. You know, there isn't anyone, I've never met anyone who is, you know, narcissists accepted, let's say.
Yeah.
People are generally tormented by their conscience. And the reason for that is that they're deviating from the path that is their destiny. I mean, and if you don't think that, well, then what do you think? What do you think that conscience is? I mean, I've asked my classes repeatedly, do you have a little voice in your head that tells you when you've done something wrong or you're about to, or a feeling? And they all immediately agree with that. No one finds that a foreign concept. And so if you don't know who you are, your conscience will remind you when you're not, or sorry, if you don't know who you could be, your conscience will remind you when you deviate. And then you can start to attend to that. Think, well, look, I'm actually ashamed when I do this. I should stop. Unless I want to be ashamed all the time, it looks like I should stop. And then maybe you stop doing that, and then your conscience objects to something else, and maybe you stop doing that. And as that happens, you start to develop a vision of who you could be. And the chapter indicates it looks at symbolic representations. It's an examination of a certain symbolic representation of the ideal. And so it's my attempt to assess tradition for what it can tell us about what the ideal human being might be like. And the ideal human being is the person who forthrightly upholds the traditions of the culture and forges a way into the unknown. We went through that, and pulls new information in and rebuilds himself and the world. For you to make contact with the highest of values, you have to bring that down to your particulars and figure out how you do that. It's going to be a way that no one else does it, because you're the only one that's you. But you can aim at something, and the point of the chapter is that you aim at something and that will shape you as you move towards it. And then your aim will change, you'll move, but that doesn't matter. It gets you going. And you'll be molded across time more and more into the person you could be.
When you're doing it right, what does it feel like?
Well, to begin with, and this happened when I was in graduate school, I had a lot of bad habits. I smoked like a pack of cigarettes a day, and I drank a lot. I came from this little town in northern Alberta, and like many little towns, especially in northern Canada, the alcohol overuse is de rigueur, you know, and so I noticed when I was in my early 20s that the only time I really regretted what I had done was when I was drinking. Now, it was also interfering with me writing, because I couldn't concentrate well enough if I was hungover, but I also couldn't really I couldn't tolerate the emotional strain of what I was writing about when I was hungover. It was I couldn't handle being on the edge because I had destabilized my nervous system. In any case, I stopped drinking. And the reason for that was, well, I decided I didn't want to be ashamed of what I was doing anymore. I thought, well, maybe I could not do things that were shameful and then see what my life was like. So that was sort of on the negative end, the constraint end. I think people get, on the more positive end, people get deeply involved in what they're doing if they're in the right place in the right time. So that I would say you can tell, this is the idea of heaven on earth to some degree. When time stops, when you're not aware of the duration of time, when you're so engaged with what you're doing that you're not aware of the duration of time, then you've got the forces of chaos and order balanced properly. You're not stultified and bored. That's an excess of order. Everything's too predictable. You're not overwhelmed. You're dealing with, you're playing tennis at the peak of your game. That's partly what people experience when they're great athletes, when they play.
The zone, yeah.
You know, and they're always stretching themselves to their limit. You can tell that if you watch a gymnast, for example, who has a brilliant performance. They've stretched themselves beyond their domain of competence during the performance. And that's what makes everybody leap to their feet. That's the incarnation given embodiment right there in front of you for some moments. And everyone cheers that on.
That it becomes fleeting, in that suddenly you could have a great month and then suddenly something happens chaos returns. Like it's that we almost forget that moment. You can't hold it.
Well, it requires even to some degree some good fortune to maintain. I certainly haven't been able to do that while I was ill. And time, one of the consequences of my illness, whatever it was or is, was time dilation. Like days lasted weeks. It seemed like minutes lasted hours. And I mean that literally. And that was terrible. The weight of time. It's the weight of brute mortality. It's the weight of self-consciousness. And you escape that immersed properly. So, and that second chapter is a pretty practical chapter. It's like, well, if you're not who you want to be, then think about how you could be better. Take a chance, aim at that, work at it, and see what happens.
One of the things I tell young people all the time, I'm not a very typical psychologist in this regard, because psychologists like to pat people on the head and say, you're all right the way you are. I talked to Bishop Barron a while ago. I'm going to broadcast this, and he said that the Catholic priests were trained in the 1960s to kind of be accepting, humanistically. You're okay the way you are, And that's such rubbish. It's like, not only are you not okay the way you are, you don't think that anybody else is okay the way they are either. And you don't think your children are okay the way they are. Like, you love them and all that, but you don't want them to stay 3 years old their entire life. You want them to expand and improve and become who they are. And so, instead of telling young people that they're okay the way they are, I tell them that, and it's a terrible message for them if they're desperate. So let's say 10% of the people in my audience are young, maybe they're young men, just for the sake of argument, and they're like not in good shape. They don't have any goals. They're drinking too much. They're watching pornography all the time. They've got no aim. They've got no structure in their life, and they're just bloody miserable. And the misery is twisting them into malevolence, because enough misery will absolutely do that to you. And then what are you going to do? And come along and say, well, you're okay the way you are? It's like, that's the last thing they want to hear. It's like, get your damn act together. You got things to do, and they're going to be difficult. And that there's an echoing Christian message in there, I would say, which is, you pick up the weight of your suffering voluntarily, and you walk uphill with it. And that not only gives you the meaning that you need in your life to stop you from degenerating in a dangerous manner, but it actually makes things better. And so that all has to be part of it. Like, I believe in human ingenuity. I think we can solve all the problems that beset us. But it can't just be, it has to be more than we can enhance material well-being, which is what it tends to be now. It's not enough. And you get brushed off by the apocalyptic types.
I've been an advocate for people to put their lives together. And of course, my life has fallen apart. And so you might ask yourself, well, are you aware of the irony of that? And the answer to that is, well, absolutely. It's shameful. I feel that frequently. And then so you might say, and people tweet this out fairly regularly, who am I to give advice? And I suppose that's a perfectly relevant question. I guess I've always thought, and I said this too in the lectures during the tour, that I don't really think that what I'm doing is giving advice, or if I am, I'm also giving it to me. It's not like I believe that I have all the answers. I have answers that I've found useful while attempting to move ahead. And with this new book, I can show you this. That's what it looks like. The black counterpart to the white book, the previous book.
Out today.
I wrote a lot of it while I was extremely ill. And there were some advantages to that, I think, in that I only kept that material that I felt was reliable under duress. Now, I think perhaps my creativity was somewhat compromised, and so that may have impacted the book negatively, but it made for more severe editing. For example, the last chapter is be grateful in spite of your suffering, and certainly maintaining that gratitude is something I've struggled with. I think anybody who's in pain chronically struggles with resentment, but I know that resentment poisons. And I think that form of courage. And so I stand by what I've written.
When I was 297 pounds and I was fat as hell trying to be a Navy SEAL, the scariest thing in the world to me, even to this day, was that could have been the rest of my life. I thought then I was trying hard. That's the scariest thing in the world. I thought then, 297 pound, working for Ecolab, spraying for cockroaches, making $1,000 a month. I thought that was me at my 100% potential. Come to find out, a few years later, I wasn't anywhere near that. 106 pounds less, graduate Navy SEAL training, went on to do all these other things. Looking back on that, that was me trying hard. That's why people gotta understand, what is in us, we have no idea until we start trying hard. And I mean really trying hard, where you're obsessed with, hey, this is my new norm. My new norm is that, wow, this isn't always fun. It's not always meant to be fun. And that's when you know you're trying hard. We have the easy voice, which is that 20% telling yourself that I'm easy at 90% of my full potential, maybe 100% at that 20%. That's that voice that we all love. That's that very comfortable voice, that's that mommy holding you saying, it's gonna be okay. Doesn't care how good you are, just loves you. Just loves you no matter how messed up you are in life. That's where you want to be at. So that's that one voice. This other voice that we walk very far away from is a voice saying, hey man, you ain't doing shit. So we try to get this voice out of our head completely. And we live over here in this land. So what you have to do first is turn up this voice over here. The voice saying things to you that aren't nice. That it's in our head saying, you know what, man? Dude, you're not doing shit. You're not and it's not putting yourself down. People take this the wrong way in this new society. I'm not saying to put yourself down. I'm saying listen to the truth. And the truth isn't in the 20%. The truth is in this other part of your brain saying, look, man, you're wasting a bunch of percentage here. We have 80 more percent that we're not tapping into, because in this other 80% is suffering, pain, failure, self-doubt, darkness, and then a whole bunch of light. But to get to this light, you gotta go through all of this shit. So a lot of us know that. We know.
We do know deep down.
Yeah, I can get over here, but over here, man, this is much better, because I gotta go through this journey that is not fun. This from 20 to 100%, this shit in between is not fun. So we decide to live over here. So everybody goes, how do you do that? You know exactly how to do that. You know exactly, it's not a magic trick. There's nothing I talk about in that book that's a magic trick. It's all back down to a very primitive mindset of we just have to do. It's like breathing. Breathing becomes normal. Like we don't even know that we're doing it. That's how you have to live your life. When that alarm clock goes off at 4 or 5 in the morning, your mind says no. You just say, it's just what we do. It's what we do now. Because to get to where you want to go, the amount of pain involved, I'm not saying physical, I'm not saying you got to break yourself off. The amount of mental pain of how many times you're going to have to do something that you don't want to do to get to where you want to go is going to be, there's going to be more times you do something that you don't want to do than you are going to want to do it. And that's your new norm. That's your new norm. So then it's like breathing. And then once you do this over and over and over again, it becomes like breathing. I don't want to live this lifestyle, but to get to the other side of this, I have to. So if you really want it, you realize what trying is and what trying is not. You will not find toughness in a comfortable environment. Those of you who are listening to this, whoever hear this, you will not find it. I was trying to look for it everywhere. The only way you find it is to drown yourself in a position where you're just out of sorts, where you can't swim and you're drowning. Where you're drowning. You're drowning in life. But you say, you know what, man? Fuck that. I'm gonna figure out how to fucking backstroke or fucking something. They have to work. And then you start to engage parts of your mind that you never engaged before. But you can't engage it by sitting back in these nice chairs, drinking this nice water, talking to you, talking about what I want to do. That's where the 40% thing comes in. It comes in when you're in suffer mode and you say, I'm not gonna quit. You're forcing your brain now to operate on a level it's not used to. Your brain is the most powerful weapon in the world. Once you put away your phones and your computers and all that shit we have nowadays, yeah, it's great. We're up to date. But your brain is the only thing you have when you're going through depression, when you're going through hard times, when you're going through death, real life shit. You can't Google that shit, man. You're alone. You're alone. You may have a shrink you're going to, you may have a best friend you're going to, but there's 24 hours in the day where you're alone in this brain, and your brain is talking to you in all kind of ways, and it wants to control you and pull you in these different pockets. If you can't control your own brain and your brain controls you, you're fucked. You got to tell your brain where you want to go and how you want to go and how you want to get there. You got to control it. If not, it's over. It's over.
And all of that you learned from your own brain. You didn't Google this shit.
No.
You didn't buy books.
It didn't exist. This shit didn't exist. I couldn't even fucking spell Google back then. This shit didn't exist, man. What existed for me was, okay, man, how am I gonna fucking make this work? And all I knew back then was hard work. The only way anything gets accomplished. That's all I heard back in those days. You gotta work hard. You gotta work hard. I'm not getting I can't get this paragraph. I can't remember what the fuck's in this paragraph to pass this test to get in the military. Read again. Still not getting it. Read again. But if not getting it, write it out. And that's how I started learning. Okay, well, I gotta write out every fucking thing I do. And then write it out again, and write it out again. And guess what happened? I got it. I got it. I can't swim. I'm negative buoyant. Go back again. I can't swim. Go back again. Go back again. Go back again. I got it. I realized if I keep going back and going back and going back until the shit just becomes, your mind will say, fuck, okay, we're gonna figure it out.
It'll find a way.
Because he is not going to stop. It's not like I'm gonna try one more time. No, it's just like alarm clock goes off, boop, we're going back. I can't read right, we're going back. I gave myself no way out, and my mind realized that. They said, okay, we're gonna adapt and overcome now. I talk about the new norm. When I lived in a $7 a month place when I was growing up for a short period of time, I loved it. I didn't know any different. That was my norm. Once we moved out of that place, we moved to a $236 a month place. I was like, shit, I never want to go back to that little piece of shit. But if you go back to that $7 a month place and you realize this is where I live, this is all I got, your mind says, roger that, this is home. So when I was going through Navy SEAL training for 18 months and going back through all the hard parts over and over again, I told myself after the first time, I knew it was gonna be a long journey there. My body was breaking down. It was just how it was going on. I said, you know what, this is my new norm. So my mind said, it's like going to work. Like you go to work, you put your suit and tie on, I go into suffering every day. Every day, suffering, being broken, duct taping my feet up, stress fractures, shin splints, being broken. This is my new norm. And your mind says, if we're not broken, this ain't normal. We gotta be broken. So then your mind starts to get tougher and tougher and more callous. People go, how did you run on broken feet? broken shins. My mind knew this is how we operate. We're in Navy SEAL training. This is what we are. I became hell. And that became my new norm. I gave myself no way out. There was nothing outside these walls of hell. Nothing. I loved God, but for a short period of time, I became the devil because that was hell. I became the boss, the owner, the CEO of Navy SEAL training. That was my mindset. And that's how you get through things. You immerse yourself wherever it is, and you become that. You become that and give yourself no way out. When you really sit back at your life and you are in that dark room and you're looking at where you started from and you tell yourself, God, dog, man, my mom is this way. My soon-to-be stepdad got murdered. My dad beat the shit out of me. I can't read and write to save my fucking soul. I've lied about it to everybody. I've cheated on all these tests. My God, man. And then you put a goal in your mind. How are you gonna feel, man, when you accomplish this goal coming from that shit? Coming from the fucking hell you came from. A lot of people start from a good starting point. They have a good foundation. What if you can surpass all of these motherfuckers? What if everybody who was fucking way up here started up here, and you started with no legs. You had to grow fucking legs to even start walking, and then crawling, and then running, and then you start passing people with all this given to them. I had to use all this negative shit that was making me weak and horrible as a person. I had to use this as the power that now fueled me. I had to flip it on its head and say, hold up. This might be exactly what I need. The darkness is exactly what I need. It's how you look at your situation. And I was looking at it all fucked up. You have to first accept it before you can fix it. A lot of people walk around, oh man, I'm good. I'm good. No, you're not. You have to accept what you're not. And people don't want to do that. And that's the only way you can fix it. You have to accept it first before you can go on the journey. A lot of folks never even start the journey, man. They never start the journey because they live in this fake life that who they want to be, they act like they are, but they're not because they haven't fixed all this stuff yet. You got to fix this first before we can start our journey in life. So that's why I have them make this list. You fix these problems, now your journey can begin because you no longer care about how people are judging you. When you care more about how someone's judging you, you're going to stay right there. There's no forward momentum. Each thing that is wrong with you has to be a focal point. You can't look at this gigantic list and say, I got to change all this shit. My God, this is crazy. No. You take off the first one. I want to be smarter. For me, that was my thing. I have to become more intelligent. I have such a severe learning disability, man. I can't retain shit. I had to now get that one thing and then strategize in that one problem. How can I do this? I'm not going to learn like you. I'm not going to learn like anybody else. How am I going to figure this out? So I then figured out, okay, where are my strengths here? Where are my weaknesses in learning? All right, man, how am I going to do this? And I figured out a way to do it by just strategizing. So how I learn to this day, if I have a big manual to study, I will have to get a bunch of spiral notebooks from the daggone store. And each page, I have to write each page out, maybe 10 times. So there was a 1,000-page dive manual that I got 18 months before I went to dive school. Most people, I'm not smart, I'm gonna go see if I can pass this test. I realized, hang on a second, I'm not smart. How can I get past this? How can I get through this obstacle? I need to acquire this book 18 months in advance because it could take me 18 months to write down each page over and over again to then put it to memory. So when the question came up, I had written that question so many times down on paper that I can recall, okay, page 71 was where I remember seeing this, and I can recall it that way. And that's how I did it. So you got to strategize on each problem you have in life. Slowly break down that problem. Don't think about all the problems you have, just one at a time. And before you know it, you fix all these problems, but you cannot focus on all of them. Just on the one thing at a time.
There's a concept in your book that it permeates the whole book, and I think really is one of the most important things for people to understand in their own life, certainly to understand you, and it's the notion of detesting mediocrity. Talk to me about that. How did you instill it in your life? How can other people instill it in theirs?
It's one of the biggest things in the world. A lot of us, mediocrity is everywhere right now. And we're all trying to find an easy way out. And we're judging ourselves. Let's say there's 10 people in this room and we're all mediocre. But I'm the best of the mediocre people. I now think I'm great. I'm great. We surround ourselves around people that make us feel great. They tell us what we want to hear. The second we put ourselves amongst the uncommon people, we don't like that feeling. That challenging feeling of that person who's waking up at 3:30 in the morning and say, hey, put your shit on, we're going for a run. We don't like that challenge. We like that person who says, hey, you know what, man, I don't feel good today, man. And they say, oh, it's okay, brother. We'll take a day off, man. We'll get a pizza and shit, watch the game. We like that. We love that feeling. Why? Because you understand, man, we're good, bro. We don't want that motherfuckers like this. Hey, man, no, bro. Get your fucking shit on, man. Stop being a punk. We don't want that in our lives. We don't want that person who's constantly challenging our weaknesses. We want that person who's constantly, making us feel nice and good and secure in ours. That's the mediocrity of life. We want to be the best amongst the average people. People wonder, how do you stay hungry all the time? Because after I accomplish something, I don't sit back like a lot of guys who graduate buds, graduate this, graduate that. They get comfortable. They wonder why I'm getting weak, man. I don't know, I lost my edge. What's going on? Because once you hit the top of the fucking mountain, guess what happened? I'm good. I'm good, so you wonder why you're falling down now. Because once you reach the top of the mountain, you got to build a fucking another one. That's mediocrity. There's a lot of people in mediocrity who have a nice resume, but they're one-timers, man. They hit a one-time deal, they busted it open, got a lot of money, but they're good. You're mediocre now, man. What are you fucking doing today, tomorrow, the next fucking day? That's why I don't listen to theorists. I don't listen to all that bullshit. I listen to a motherfucker who's like this, man. What's wrong, man? I'm fucking tired, dude. Why are you tired? Because tomorrow, I gotta do the fucking shit again, man. Whatever the shit is that made me fucking nauseous and sick to my stomach, it made me hurt. There's no ending. And that's the person I listen to. That's the person who's gained knowledge. You gain knowledge through suffering. And on the other end of suffering is a world that very few have ever seen. It's a beautiful world because that's where you find yourself. You don't find yourself in over here. You find yourself on the other end. Like the 100-mile race I was on, I ran it for 24 hours. I found myself on the other end of that fucking race. That 19 hours, I found, wow, there's a whole nother fucking world out here that I've never even saw. But the world is in your mind. And that's what all that mediocrity is about. Mediocrity is contagious. I'm a very philosophical person. And I'm going to go there with you real quick. I believe in a higher power. Don't know the name, don't know where it's coming from, don't know anything like that. But I believe that this power, and visualize with me real quick. Let's say it's a man up there or a woman, whatever, and they have a chart. And when you're born, they say David Goggins, born February 17th, 1975 at 6 a.m. They write the chart down because they can see everything. They know exactly what you're fucking supposed to be. They know what you're supposed to be. You die, you go to so-called heaven. You arrive at heaven, I'm 300 pounds. I retired as an Ecolab guy, which is okay. It's just a job, whatever. I go up there and God looks at me and he shows me my chart. And my chart on there says you were supposed to be a Navy SEAL. You're supposed to weigh 185 pounds. You're supposed to be one of the smartest people on the planet, this, all this. You see this. And now you're in heaven, you made it to heaven, but you're like, God, Doug, I was supposed to live that life. I was supposed to live that life. And then you find out that the reason why, because we all think that if we pray on it, if we do this, if we do that, whatever, if we don't work, we just, whatever, it's going to magically happen for us. No, I believe that when I'm all said and done with, my whole job is to outwork the chart. Whatever the fucking chart says about me, the all-knowing power up there, I want to get up there and say, him look at me and say, I know everything. I didn't fucking see this. I didn't fucking see this. I want to feel that. I want to get to the other end of this fucking world, and however I'm being judged, whoever's judging me, to look at me and say, I did not fucking know. I had you at 185, I had you at this, but all this other shit, I was riding as you were living it. I want to find more. All I can. And in that fucking sack of shit, you have to dive in that to find more. Because if you're not willing to go in there and face yourself, you're not gonna find anything. You're gonna live right here on surface, man, right here on surface. So if there is an ending to this world and there is somewhere to go and there's a judgment, you're gonna get there and you might see a chart. And that chart may tell you who the fuck you should have been. And now you get the rest of your life to think about that. Man, I could have lived a much better life if I just would have just suffered a little bit more. If I just would have went in that shit and realized I had so much more. But fear and the 40% and living here versus living here, being afraid, stop me.
Jordan, let me ask you this. Would you consider yourself happy today?
No.
And when's the last time you were happy?
I was happy a little bit last week for a couple of hours. I'm in too much pain and to be happy still. I mean, it's not like I don't appreciate what's good about my life. I do appreciate it, and I remember it consciously all the time. And my wife and I remind each other about it constantly. And so I see that all very clearly, and I can see where the sources of happiness could lie, but I have a lot of neurological damage by all appearances, and it produces quite a lot of pain. And so I'm overcoming that, I think, bit by bit. Like, I have a very structured day. So I get up and I have a sauna, and then I walk for 6 miles, and then I exercise for an hour quite intensely with weights. And I dance a little bit to music because while I'm trying to regain control over all my extremities, and that's all working quite well. And then I have the podcasts and so forth. And so I have a well-structured life, but it's still not to the point where I would say I was happy. I'd like to get there. Healthy really is really what I'd want. Healthy and fully functioning. I'm running at about 50% now, and it was down to about 5% for a long time. 50 is a lot better.
No, and that's great to hear. What's the longest, like, if you were to put outcomes of a life, like you would say priorities? Okay, happiness, I'm living a happy life, fulfilled life, healthy life. How would you rank those 3 for someone like you?
Oh, well, healthy is by far the most important. But then I wouldn't use those criteria. Like, I think I'm very pleased if I can say things that I believe to be true. I've written about this, said pursue what's meaningful and not what's expedient. And I would also say that it's useful to say what is true rather than to craft your words so that you get what you want. And part of the reason for that, there's many reasons, but part of the reason for that is that it's unbelievably adventurous. You have no idea what will happen if you just say what you think. And my experience has been that the consequences are absolutely overwhelming, always, constantly. And, you know, when I go into a talk like this, I don't have an outcome in mind. I don't want to make a fool of myself. I don't want to say something stupid. I want to engage in an interesting conversation, but I'm not I don't have an agenda other than that, but it's just to say what I feel in the moment as clearly as I possibly can. It's so adventurous to do that. And it's far better than pursuing a more narrow goal that might be wrong. And so there's an adventure there and I think one of the things I love about the long form video format is that it enables people to engage in the mutual exploration of truth, the revelation of truth, the discovery of truth. And it's so interesting too that people find that compelling and exciting and watch it and want it.
ever catch yourself asking, oh man, maybe I'm in too deep of being this worried genius and I've lost a bit of my happy simpleton.
Yeah, well, I certainly experienced that when my health broke down. And the reason for that was that I not only did I get sick, my life fell apart because I couldn't do anything that I used to be able to do. I couldn't listen to music. I couldn't read. I couldn't write. I couldn't think. I couldn't do any of them because everything that I had done was complex and difficult, all the things that I engaged in. And what I did realize was that that left me vulnerable on a certain front, because if I wasn't in peak health, let's say, I wouldn't be able to do those things. And so, I mean, that's why I'm walking now, for example. You know, I said I walk 6 miles a day, and I do that every day. It's very simple. And I've played a lot of ping pong, and I've always liked that, but I never played that much, but I liked that. And there is some utility in having things around that are rewarding and good for you, that are less complex. I would say, though, that with regards to the conflict between, let's say, you know, miserable wisdom and happy ignorance, is that there's different forms of rewards to be found in different places. You know, you can think about this even in terms of personality. One major personality dimension is extroversion. And the reason for that is that we have a pleasure circuit, and how active that is varies between people. That's what causes variation in extroversion. And we generally equate happiness with the activation of the circuitry that's associated with extroversion. And drugs like cocaine and amphetamines activate that circuit. But there's another personality dimension, which is openness. And openness is the creativity dimension, and there's pleasure to be derived from that as well. And so that's philosophical exploration and literary experience. And I suppose when you go to a movie, you experience a blend of those two things, especially if it's a rather complex movie. So there's different forms of engagement or pleasure to be found, and some of them are more akin to happiness, and some of them are more akin to meaning. And sometimes they come into conflict, but I think all things considered, they work best when they're working together. And I do strive diligently to and I think that this has really been brought home to me. You know, look, I couldn't sit down. I literally couldn't sit down for almost a year. And so I lost the ability to sit down. I had fantasies for hours of being able to sit by a fireplace and just not move, because I had this condition called akathisia, which is, I learned how valuable it is to be able to sit down. And now when I sit down and nothing is happening, I'm taking stock of that and noticing what an unbelievable gift that is. And it is really useful to maintain your ability to see what you have that you've taken for granted, because you can lose everything. You can lose things you don't even know you have. I had no idea that you could ever lose the ability just to sit down, but you can. I wouldn't recommend it. So I'm more appreciative, I would say, of simpler things than I was. I'm more appreciative of other people than I was. I'm probably more grateful, all things considered, than I was. And hopefully that will continue developing. I have no contempt for happiness. You know, I tell people, don't pursue happiness, pursue meaning. And I think that's true. But if happiness comes along, it should be welcomed. And if you're ever somewhere where that's happening, you should notice it and be grateful for it and enjoy it. And that's for sure. When someone stops me on the street, and that happens all the time, they're usually shy and tentative about stopping me, and usually very, very polite, almost invariably. So it's never a real imposition. And I always ask people, you know, if they say that they watched a lecture and it helped, I always ask them why, you know, what helped. And so I had 3 guys this week tell me, they said, well, I was comparing myself to what other people had achieved and always coming up short, and that was hurting me. It was making me envious, let's say, and disheartening me. But then I learned to reward myself for small improvements over who I was. And I thought, well, that's really important, because you are comparing yourself to the right person then, and now you're rewarding yourself, you're encouraging yourself for taking the steps that you can take. It's really important to do that right. And now I know that that's important to my listeners, and so I'll try to formulate that concept more accurately and communicate it more clearly. It's a great privilege. It's a great privilege to be able to do this with the podcasts and the books, and it's great. It's great.